From the developmental years in early education to institutes of higher learning, teachers and educators help us to understand the world in molding, guiding us, and being mentors in aspects of our lives. In this mini-series on Teacher Appreciation Week for 2025, I am joined by my first ESL teacher and one of the educators that inspired me to create this podcast. Born at the end of World War II, grown up in California and in Arizona, join us as we go through his life being raised in Fallon, Nevada, by a teacher and a sign maker. We explore his life as the only white student in an all-black school in North Vegas in the 50s, the University of Nevada, Reno in the 1960s, and his 2 years volunteer service in Vietnam. We touch on his late entrance into education and his views on the changes that affected not only me as his student, but all of his students' lives through the often difficult assimilation via ESL. Well, welcome back to the ESL sessions on this segment of En Mi Comunidad and for the 2025 Teacher Appreciation Week. Now, this interview is truly special for me, just as the previous ones, because every single one of these educators has done something to be able to be looked at and chosen a profession that is seldom recognized in the way that it should be. And for my guest today, I actually have someone very unique and in a way in which they actually inspired me not only to create the podcast in itself and start doing these interviews, using it as a platform, but as a reason in a lot of ways why my career path and decisions went the way they did. But before we get into those specific details and before we get into getting to know him a lot better in more detail, I'll let him introduce himself and we can go ahead and begin. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, my name is Ted March, and I was born in 1945 in Salinas, California. And I was thinking, how did I end up in the, I'm not a traditional teacher. Many teachers got out of college and they've been in school all their lives. But I came in my 40s into the teaching profession by a long, tumultuous route, and basically a working class story, But the common thread has always been multicultural, multiracial, multilingual. I've looked back over my life how I ended up in a place called Fernley doing ESL with a bunch of Mexicanos mostly, but there were other students too. I I went to I was born in Kingman in Salinas, California, and then I lived in Kingman, Arizona, which is a dusty little railroad town down there. And then I spent my elementary years in 1950s in North Las Vegas. And my mother was a teacher in North Vegas. And North Vegas, if you know Vegas, is a sketchy part of town, I'll put it that way. But I went to an all-black school. This is segregation in the 50s. An all-black school. I was the only white kid in a all-black school. How did that happen? My mother, who was white, obviously, and I wished I would have asked her what caused her to go over there. This is the middle of the civil rights era. This is all those black and white civil rights movies you've seen in the 50s, Martin Luther King and all of that stuff going on. And so she volunteered to go over to West Side Vegas. And West Side was the black area of Vegas then, and to an all black school. And I went over there. It was like around the third grade, maybe fourth grade, And I have sort of vague memories of this. I had a black girlfriend, and we used to run around in the neighborhood there and after school with her. Kids were not supervised much then. We were just what do they call them? Free range kids. And I have really strong memories of that, including my father, who was a white Republican guy. We used to go to teacher events there at this school. And one of the times they got off there, he went down to a casino with the principal of this school and counselor of this school, two black guys. and my father. And in those days, men dressed going to the casino. They wore a tie. It's hard to believe. All certainly school people did, you know. So they went to a casino out on the strip someplace, and they had a couple of drinks. Or sitting at the bar, and the my dad looks around, and there's a security guard in the back of the casino going like this to him. Hey, come over here. And he talked to him real quietly, and he says, you guys can finish your drinks, but you got to leave the casino when you're done with this drink. He didn't want to make a scene, you know. But basically, he threw him out. That's the way it was then. So, you know, I grew up on these stories, even from that age. um, and then in general, my family was a Serbian immigrants, and my grandmother came over to this. She was an ESL person. She came over to this country on a train before the First World War with a tag on her collar, like a UPS package, and it said, "My name is so and so, and send me to Ely, Nevada." So she went to each train station, and I guess this was standard for immigrants then, you know. And she made it to no English, no nothing. She didn't know where in the hell she was going, and ended up with this minor that she was another Serbian guy, and they were in a ghetto, Serbian ghetto there, and they were definitely, you know, they're Serbs, Yugoslavs, and you know, their neighbor was a Mexican. They had a lot of stories about the Mexican neighbors then, that whole life, you know. So even as a little kid, you know, in the 50s, I heard a lot of second languages around me. um, so, and I ended up in Fallon. We left Vegas because it was too big. It was 48,000 people there. And my father said, this is getting to be like LA. It's what, 2.5 million, I think, Vegas now. And went to Fallon, Nevada. And my first friend was a Mexican kid, Danny Blea. And we're living in a trailer park there, working class. And he was a paperboy going by, and I got to meet him and talk to him, and you know, we became friends. And I'd end up over at his house, and that's the first time I was in a all Spanish atmosphere. His father was working as a section foreman on the railroad, and we used to go fishing at Lake Lahontan. You probably remember, you were there, and you know, we drop him off at Bango, a section house. It's on near Lake Lahontan, and go fishing for the day and go back, you know. So, and there were not many Hispanics in Fallon then. It's hard to believe compared to now, you know. And we were strong friends, Danny and I. And I don't know why, it was just always gravitated, you know, to something different. And I do recall somebody in the school or in a white guy say, "Hey, Ted," they pull me aside. Oh, here we go. You know, this isn't really good for your standing. That's the way it was then, you know. It still is in a lot of ways, I'll put it. But you know, I got pissed off, of course, and so from an early age, as a freshman in high school, I was, I don't know what, kind of pro for the underdog, for the, I was attracted to. I had an Arabian friend, a guy from Morocco, you know, there, you know, somebody, the difference, you know, and I was just always attracted to that. Um, I worked, you know, when I was a high school kid, worked with my father. He was a sign painter, uh, a milk truck, construction cleanup, but some ranch work. Went out in Fallon and learned that ranch life. Had a good friend out there. Uh, I remember in the 60s working with my father He was an excellent. He worked on the strip. He was a first-rate pictorial artist on bulletin boards. So in the old days, the showgirl boards and all the liquor boards, he did all of that. He was excellent at that, and he worked for a big Salt Lake company, and I spent a summer with him. I think I was a first year of college or something then, somewhere around there. But we were in Windover, working on a sign, 100 degrees, and we're along the road. A black family comes across, and my dad, hey, what's wrong? They got a couple little kids and a man and a wife. And, oh, we broke down about 5 miles back there across the border. I remember him saying, well, you survived Utah. God is with you this time. And he gave him $20. That's equivalent to $100 now, to buy a new starter. That they needed something like that, And so that attitude, and that was an old-fashioned Republican, a white guy. But he was a Depression kid who rode freight trains back and forth across in the 30s, the country, slept on the ground by the tracks. And so he always had that same, I don't know, working class compassion. uh, when I went to UNR from graduated from high school, I went to UNR from 64 to 68. And I worked with my father. I was a busboy at the Sparks Nugget. I worked in an iron mine. I had a Chinese girlfriend, another multicultural thing in Ely. Guy ran a restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, and I started dating his daughter, So, and it's hard for imagine your generation, that when you look at the schools now, and there's no big deal, but then it kind of was, it was, you would get the look from people on the street, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a lot of change.
Yeah. I remember one day at FIS, I was doing yard duty out there just to go ahead, how many years, 50 years. And some girls are running around the perimeter of the thing. And it was weird. It was like a movie. There was a Mexican girl, a black girl, an Asian girl, and a couple of white girls. And they all had their arms together, and they were like sixth graders, going around the yard like that, And I got thinking at the time, I thought, man, if their parents saw this, some of their parents,
Yeah. It's
And I said, this is great. This is such progress that these young people, that I'd listened to a bunch of old guys talking about, the kids nowadays. And I said, this was such a change from my childhood and young adulthood, So that common thread of multiculturalism, I think I've always picked up. And I went to Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, actually, that one I kind of want to unpack a little bit separately. But man, for like I said, if you've ever growing up, I guess, with your mentors in the same way, I don't know if you've ever experienced that moment where you hear somebody, you listen to them, and they start telling their stories. Like I didn't want to interrupt you because it's like I said, it's a lot. It's a lot of information that we, as the younger generations, as younger people in each generation, we tend to forget that there existed a whole entire aspect of something that we were not a part of, that was lived out and thought through by our elders. And like I said, listening to you explain and go into that detail about growing up in such a segregated time frame. But primarily what I took out of that was the fact that people tend to forget how diverse and extremely vast the United States was. The United States was already post-World War, minus the fact that segregation, racism, and oppressions of certain liberties were already rampant and all over the places. Not over the fact that we've seen them in the major cities, but it was all over the place. But in the rural places, especially somewhere like Nevada, being somewhat of a country, a big country rancher area, that there would be so many different types of minorities, ethnic groups, and different types of people from all over the place. That's one of the things that did surprise me, and I know for sure a lot of people still don't know about that, other than maybe the small stuff that we were taught during school, during the expansion period, as well as the California gold rush.
Yeah, it's it's I'm looking from a perspective of a long time, and they say the happy days, 50s, or the good times, et cetera, et cetera. No, not so much. It was for certain people, but it wasn't for others. Women, any minorities, racial minorities, et cetera. It really wasn't. Yeah, Hispanics. I mean, my God, uh, you know, what was that? Lula. There was a Hispanic uh, veterans group. But it all started back in the 40s. There was a
Oh, Luma, Lupe,
uh,
La Unión del Pueblo,
yeah, there's a
the
bunch
farm
of
workers
groups. I've
unions.
I've
Yep.
been away from those. I didn't write that down. I just thought of it.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
no, it's
but it started with a guy who was killed. I think in El Paso, Mexican American, and they wouldn't bury him in the Veterans Cemetery. I don't know if it rings a bell with you, but I kind of have a rough. You can look it up later. They wouldn't bury him in the cemetery, and they made a big demonstration and a fight, and it started a whole group of Hispanic veterans, World War II veterans, who uh, uh, they were sort of the Hispanic version of the civil rights movement in the 50s that most people don't know about. And they said, "The hell with this. We put our butts on the line for this country, and we're going to get our rights." And so that was the World War II was just a cornucopia of everything happened. A lot of the stuff that we live with now, for good and bad. So they were the schools they had. 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education. Uh, uh, Separate but equal schools they had before. And this was very much true. You talk to my Laura, my ex-aide, and she remembers that well, the way that was in Texas. They had schools for the Mexican kids there. And it was the same thing. And they had groups that fought that and changed that. But
yeah, it's there's a lot of things that really within your era of growing up as what do you call it, within that time frame of the segregation period, the what do you call it, the social turmoil of the time prior to the impact of the Vietnam War, is a lot of things that changed the educational system for good and for better. And that's where where I still think personally, from people that tend to either want to try to ignore it or haven't looked thoroughly into the past of the situations of where we are right now, is how affecting it was. And that for a lot of the sacrifice that the minority groups, that the racial tensions caused, it was a lot of advancements that most people that I've interviewed or have talked to within the late generation of the boomers that are a little bit more progressive, or actually have a recognized understanding of what occurred and what's continuing to kind of just regress and happen once more, is that the changes that they didn't expect to happen, but we're glad that did. And it's one of those things, like I said, that really getting into that, how you're saying, is that the education system, the way that people interact, is just it's something just, I know, it's still incredible to me, especially being a child of immigrants, an undocumented illegal immigrant myself, growing up through most of my years in school, but being, like I said, being able to have a mentor like yourself. But I wanted to ask something about that with you during that the civil rights era. How, before even getting into your education and while you were attending the school, how was that different in this region of the country? Like I said, we definitely heard about already the Montgomery bus boycotts, the riots where the police were sicking dogs on all of the black African Americans in Tennessee and Georgia, Atlanta, all that stuff. For us that didn't know, or there's very seldom little information about the western part outside of the major cities in California, in northern Southern California and the West. How was it for us? How was it for your generation here in Nevada, especially in Reno?
Yeah, kind of going back to 50s Vegas. They used to call it the Mississippi of the West. And we have that image of Mississippi, and oh, we're so much more advanced out here. But there was I don't know if you ever heard of Sammy Davis. He was a famous singer, movies, etc. He was part of the Rat Pack. That when I was a kid, they were all talking about him. Which gangster was the best one, and etc. That's a whole separate topic. But I grew up in gangster Vegas, with all these stories. But that Sammy Davis Jr. was a headliner. He couldn't go in the front door of the casinos. He had to go in the back door through the service entrance or through the kitchen in Vegas. So that's the way it was then. All those people on the West Side were working. It was the Hispanic presence wasn't like it is now, of course. We go to Vegas and it's Chinese food, whatever kind of place you're doing, it's all Spanish speakers doing the work. They're doing there's a separate topic there. But, the atmosphere was such a Fallon, Nevada, when I grew up there. I talked to Indians. And this is like in the early 60s. If you remember the Fallon Nugget there, the casino there on the Main Street, that still exists, but they couldn't go in there. They had to go back in the alley if they wanted a hamburger, and knock on the door of the, and they could buy a hamburger in back out in the alley. This is like 1961 or something, So this is past the 50s, within my young adult memory of how it was. Bottom line, we have made a lot of progress when you look back, on my years, and there's still a lot of progress to be made. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but yeah, those changes are a lot more. They're definitely a lot more prominent and visible. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing where, like I said, I mean, I can only say so much about my experience, right? As being only 32 years old, but like what I've lived through. But reading into it, looking and interviewing other people from all over the country within my age group, a little bit older, a little bit younger, is there's a bit of a common thread in the way that these interactions always seem to be very relatable and very, very unique to the individual, but not disconnected from one another or each other. And it always just seems to be within that social construct of the social interactions, and like who's willing to be able to defend each other, who's willing to be able to speak up for somebody else, or how easily it is to be oppressive like that in a lot of ways. And yeah, and like I said, hearing it from somebody from that actually lived it through that time, it brings in a lot of more questions into the progress that we made. And you're very correct in saying that there's still more progress to be made, especially since even in our modern times with everything that's going on, the tensions are rising, and it seems somewhat of a regression. It seems somewhat of a regression.
yeah, on many levels, yeah, there's regression. Heck, we're back to the Ukraine or something now. It's
Yeah.
World War I trench warfare. If you're watching those
Oh yeah.
that stuff, but my God, it's just
Yeah,
uh,
no, it's interesting. But before we move on, I know, like I said before, we had the conversation, and especially what we talked about. I know Vietnam. Before we actually get into the topic of the Vietnam era, like I said, I know that you said that you didn't want to touch anything specific, and we don't have to, but just for context, whatever you want to say is strictly available to you, and like I said, no details, because primarily from what we've learned and what we know is that it was always a very contested conflict. I personally, as I said, cannot say from what I've read and from what it is a war, not in the sense of the way of how these past 20 years have gone with Afghanistan, even being in the military. But how, going into that era, how was it for you when the initial conflicts broke out, when you received news of what was happening in Southeast Asia?
I remember being in high school and walking with Danny Blea, my Mexicano buddy, and he said, "Ted, did you hear the news today? There were 26 Americans killed. This is like 1962 or somewhere in there, before we really got involved much." Oh, okay, and wow, it just you can forget a lot of big things. You remember little things. You remember that. I remember that day walking down or to school or something with him, and yeah, uh, it's then of course the JFK murder, the assassination happened my last year of high school in
Mhm.
November of '63, and I remember looking back. I learned later that that was my ticket to Vietnam. That day, I was sitting in an art class in Churchill County High School in Fallon, and the teacher said, "The president has been assassinated." Um, and of course, everybody's stunned there, and we're kids still, and but I learned later, that he had an order to pull out of Vietnam. He was a Navy veteran, okay, who was had it. You probably know the whole story of the PT 109, who had that boat shot out from underneath him, and he had physical problems all his life that people didn't know about. He had to be drugged up to walk, you know, and he knew war. Khrushchev on the Russian side, that they were on the phone during the when I was in high school, that we damn near had a nuclear war, But he got on the phone with another war veteran named Nikita Khrushchev, who was at Stalingrad and those places, those legendary places. And they're on two sides of things, but the one thing they knew was war. Those two. And they got on the phone and said, "Hey, this is not going to go well. Can you pull your ships back? And we'll back off a little bit here, and we'll make you a deal." And they did some horse trading and cool things down. And it's often said that we only exist now because JFK was president then. So they couldn't have that. Uh,
Yeah.
so and I that struck me. This was many years later. That's how I ended up in Vietnam. JFK, it wouldn't have happened. And then they ramped it all up. They had the Gulf of Tonkin incident, that false flag. So the time was, then I got through college, and you had deferments. I went 4 years to UNR, and I ended up with a, a, a diploma,
Mhm.
uh, which was easy. Then you could work at the Sparks Nug. I had no debt or nothing. bought groceries, bought liquor, partied, everything, had a car, paid for. And I was just a working class kid that was so different than now. Yes, what they're faced with everything. Adults can't afford the stuff that we had then. But so it was there were kind of it was good times even to be a student then. And I was dumb. I should have stayed in school. But I graduate, and the draft is always on you. Then that was just a heavy weight on everybody. And well, I guess I don't know. I think I'll join the Air Force. That would be the smart thing to do. They said the dumb guys join the Army, and the smart guys join the Navy and the Air Force. That was then. That was the skinny. And so I went there, and they said, "Oh well, you wear glasses." And could I be a pilot? I'm a pilot now, but no, you can't with glasses. But you could be a weapons officer. You could sit in the back seat in an Air Force. I don't know about that. And I was not that good. I didn't have a good self-image. Hey, it's a kind of a working class thing too. I don't know how do you put it. You don't realize what you can do. You're just there's nobody helping you, guiding you, or doing anything. It's just you think, well, I'm just a dumb guy. I couldn't handle the math. I learned otherwise later. But so I talked to. He said we have a wild weasel program. That was the F-105 where you go in. And I had a pilot tell me, I know a whole bunch of pilots, Navy, Air Force, everything, World War II pilots, all from all eras. And he said, that was your lucky day when you walked out of that Air Force office, because half of those wild weasels were shot down over North Vietnam. That was a very dangerous mission. They were like forward, they would go in ahead. And so then I ended up, went to a Navy recruiter, and I joined the Navy. Oh, I see here you've got a degree. Wow, yeah. I thought, well, yeah, man, I'm going to be in intelligence maybe, or submarine school. Yeah, maybe that's it. But at that time, they thought, man, no, that's the cream of the crop. And so I joined the Navy, and I end up, in Vallejo, California, at the Naval Inshore something training center there at Mare Island, and on World War II riverboats. And they had all kinds of riverboats, but ours was an LCM. They still have that, some version of that now. That it's when you think of D-Day, the old landing craft that dropped on there and they dropped it. That's what it was. Ours was 1944 in Vietnam. That's what we had. And it was about a boat about as wide as this living room, 18 feet, let's say, and 45, 50 feet long, just a 6 knots. And it was loaded down with armor, bar armor on all the sides. If you look at the picture, I should have brought some. And for RPGs, which they're using, I'm watching stuff on in Palestine and in Ukraine. Every day I'm watching this war stuff. And they're shooting these rocket propelled grenades. So we had bar armor on that. That was the main threat. And that's you've seen the shoulder launched things.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The VC would use them, and they would pop up. We were in canals as wide as this house. Nightmarish.
Mm-hmm.
Just the worst possible naval situation I think there is. I don't know. I'd rather be on an aircraft carrier in World War II. But the rockets were designed, they would burn a hole through the side of the boat or the armor or whatever. It could be 4-inch armor, it didn't matter. And it would hit the boat and then spray all of the hot material like a welding, like a acetylene welder cutting tool, and spray it all over the place. So the boat was loaded down with heavy armor. It was a scow to begin with, and so I was ended up being a bosun's mate, you know. And you got two levers to steer this thing. You got two 671 diesel engines, World War II, stinking and just awful, 120 degrees, and nobody could wear any. They had an early form of body armor then, a vest, you know, but it was so hot, it was thick that you couldn't wear it, you know. We wore underpants and flip flops and t-shirts. That was our uniform. I have some pictures I should have brought, but we looked like a bunch of hippies. We would pick up the army. These were like real servicemen. They were wearing uniforms, and we looked like bums with beards. And there was no. It was weird. It was no. It wasn't the Navy like you think of a Navy.
Oh yeah.
I thought I was going to go to Spain and wear a clean white uniform and meet girls. You know, that was my dream. So I ended up in this damned situation here on riverboats. They had all kinds, or you know, but ours happened to be based on an LCM. Mines. We used to drag the rivers with. You've heard of point men on the
Yep.
Army, you know, where they had the guy that went ahead. Oh, very often our boat was the point boat. There were 6 boats behind us, let's say, going up a canal or a narrow river, and we dragged a like a grappling iron behind the boat to catch the wire that the Viet Cong or North Viet they had. It was a I forget the term for that kind of a mine. It wasn't radio, but they just literally had a wire with a button, you know.
Yeah.
And as soon as they saw you, boom, you know. And
Yeah.
eventually my boat was blown in half. And I got a job. I became a yeoman, so to speak. I got off the rivers and, oh, you got a degree. Well, you can work in the office here. It was a base called Mito, about 40 miles from Saigon, but out in the jungle. And it's getting mortared every 3 days. And and they said, oh, yeah, I can type. And I told a lot of students when I was trying to teach keyboarding skills, I said, that saved my life. My typing teacher in high school, that old bat who I hated, she saved my life. I learned how to touch type, you know, and I got a job in writing letters for the commander and the whatnot and filing, doing the filing, and basically a yeoman job.
Oh yeah.
But what I thought was, I don't know what it is now. It's computers and everything else, but we had a thermite grenade on top of the filing cabinets, and if the base was going to be over, and it was, they come in the wire. We were like grunts jumping in holes at night, but they would come through the wire, and we were instructed to, if we actually got overrun, pull the pin on this thermite grenade, and it would burn all the way through the file. I don't know if they still have such a thing. Maybe they do on ships or something.
Yeah, and, it's yeah, no, how you explain it, it's a lot of changes. What do you call it? Yeah, yeoman, that's actually my job still in the military. The same thing, typing, filing, and everything. But how you explain it, like having been already in 3 different communities, both in the surface, being on the ships, wearing the crisp whites, and then switching over to aviation side is a complete shift of the community and the culture just in general. And then ultimately where I'm at right now, an expeditionary command, that sounds a lot more what you were doing. It sounds a lot more what we've been doing or have done. I guess as of recent, not getting into any specific details of where, just because it's still semi fresh, but it's still just interesting how many things still carry over from previous conflicts, from previous situations, the destruction orders, and then patrolling maneuvers, and even, like you said, body armor and weapons and things like that. So it's still very interesting. With that though, it's you looking at the notes, you said you were there from 68 to 70. How was it? How was it for you after you left, after this whole entire experience of being essentially blown up, and then being on a heightened sensitive alert up until your departure?
Well, it was interesting. uh, yeah, I was really weird. I said, I'm in the Navy, but here I am at night under flares and things, and I'm sitting behind sandbags like a damn Marine, a jarhead, you know, and doing base defense, you know. One of my most dangerous days in Vietnam, I often laugh about it, it's not funny. Well, I was doing laundry, carrying my laundry. And the week before somebody was killed in a hooch, they called them. It was a sort of a metal barracks they had then. You know, they had sandbags, but the damned um, mortar round came in right through the roof and killed this army guy. Just hit him on his cot in the bed, you know, and that of course freaked us out. And so I went out and I found an unused bunker that had dirt walls and a dirt roof. I still have a picture of it. And I said, I'm going to take this over. That's weird. That was you're in a more structured environment. Okay, you can have that, Ted. You got it. And I bribed a CB to bring some wiring over, and he ran some. We put some lights in it,
Mm-hmm.
and every place I've been, and I built some wooden cots and things and set it up. At least if a mortar hit the damn place, you'd survive. That was the idea. And then pretty soon it was full of guys there. It was a big, maybe an ammunition bunker at one time, and we lived in that, you know. But you could just do weird stuff like that, you know. Just buy somebody a couple of beers and on the boats, if anything you wanted, you know, with sea rations. We used to go back. We would work off of LSTs, go out to the big river, the Mekong, tributaries of the Mekong, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and they had LSTs out there. And we would just, they would give us all the sea rations we wanted. They were then in boxes, you know, cans with cigarettes. And we would trade them with the Vietnamese for whatever you wanted, you know. Little kids coming up and they were the UPS, you know. It was I went over there. The other funny thing about my experience was I went over there with no weapons training. No, nothing. I shot a 22 when I was a kid in Fallon. My father died right a few months before I was going to Vietnam. And okay, I got some leave to go do the funeral for a couple of weeks, and I came back and I just went to Vietnam. That was it. I missed gunnery school. They had gunnery school. Like you're supposed to know how to shoot an M16, uh, M78, I think it was grenade launchers. We had Honeywell automatic grenade launchers. They still have those. I see them in
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine. 20 millimeter cannon was our basic. We had two of those on them. The World War II cannons, aircraft cannons. And I didn't know anything. Hand grenades, you know, it's a good idea to know how to throw a hand grenade. One of our duties was out on the big rivers. They would say, just circle all night. They'd set a couple of cases of hand grenades on the deck. And this particular one was a ATCH. It was had a helicopter medevac deck, and you could. Our job was to take. They had these 1 pound grenades. They were not the little round ones like you see in movies. They were uh, cylindrical. They were British grenades, and they're concussion grenades. So anyway, I forget every 10 minutes or something, you'd pull the pin and throw it over the side into the water. In it, you know, it would hit our boat like a hammer, you know. And that was the idea. If there's any sappers swimming, it killed them basically. Kind of like a depth charge
Hmm.
would be for a submarine. And this came about because I think it was a USS Benoit, one of those LSTs. They had a bunch of them lined up there. Everything was on them, shops and things. But they did have a sapper come up there and put a mine against the hull, and it killed like 10 sailors. Blew a big. They said you could drive when they. This was a little before I was there. You could drive. They drove the river boats up into the hole and dropped it to get them out. And these were just a bunch of guys who thought they were safe uh, on that LST. So
Hmm.
that was our job sometimes, doing that, just circling all night and dropping those things. I had no experience with it, you know, and because I missed gunnery school entirely. I thought they didn't give a damn. I mean, my God. So I one thing after another, a grenade launcher. They're like a huge shotgun, 40 millimeter or something. I forget the exact, roughly. And you'd put this in this shotgun shell that thing looking thing, and I would aim it. And they say, "Hey, stop that, Ted! What are you doing? My God, you aim at the trees, that damn thing, it'll kill you. You'll hit a thin branch of a tree and the thing explodes on you." I didn't know that, you know, how to throw a hand grenade. So I was learning on the job. Okay, this is how you throw a hand grenade.
Hmm.
20 millimeter cannon. I opened up. They had a lot of junk then. That's the things that came out in the field were just. I guess you've seen 20 millimeter uh,
Yep.
rounds. Yeah, they must. That's still kind of standard. It said 1951 Hawthorne, Nevada.
Hmm.
They have a big ammunition
Oh,
plant there.
yep.
This was old stuff, and you would open it up, and the links would be rusty and corroded. It was just that's it. That's what we got. It jammed all the time. I didn't know this. I didn't go to gunnery school at Fort Roberts. And I'm shooting one night where they said, okay, there's that village over there. Put a wall of steel, they'd call it. You just go back and forth over it, and it's something a couple of miles away, maybe. You couldn't really see what you're shooting at. And the thing jams, stops. And I'm sitting there, well, I guess I'm going to open this thing up and get the shell. They said, get the hell out of there. They, just about pulled me out by the hair. Oh, I didn't know that when they jammed, they cook off and the damn thing blows up on you,
Hmm.
you know. So those kind of things. I had no clue, and I had to learn on the job, with others showing me how to handle naval weapons. Uh, uh, it, it's like I see things now. The Ukraine, they have guys who had two weeks of training, and they send them to get killed. You know, it's the same thing that strikes me as. So I got out. Uh, I had a lot of interesting things. They recently had the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.
Hmm.
There was quite a few videos. If you're interested, I could show you, send you a link. But I remember that very well. I was out by then, 1975, driving across the country, and I didn't know what was going on at all. I heard about it years later. But the places they showed, that bridge over the Saigon River and thing, I drove across there many times. They would send me out for errands from this base to go into Saigon to take care of various things. And all of those scenes there were very familiar to me. Multicultural. I didn't want to go to. I didn't. I went to some bars like with other servicemen, but I was more interested. I was a tourist in Vietnam, and I was interested in the culture. And I went out by myself. It's kind of dumb when you think about it. In every place, all over Saigon, just walking around, trying the food and talking to the people, and that's what I did on my off-duty hours. Had a multicultural tour. I went out on a tour with a Vietnamese Marine. I think he was a Marine. Somehow I made tied up with this Vietnamese guy who spoke some English, you know. Hey, let's go out and look at a French Foreign Legion base, you know. When I look back, that wasn't maybe the safest thing to do. So we drove out there in a Jeep, you know, and just two of us, and walked around this old abandoned French Foreign Legion base when the French were there, you know. It was like something out of a
Mhm.
movie, just weird, you know. He showed me how to shoot a 45. I never did, you know. He said, "Oh man, don't that'll break your thumb," you know. And I remember going out and shooting a 45 with him. Uh, but I interacted with the locals, you know, and we uh, that was always it. And I had a Vietnamese girlfriend. I went, I guess, AWOL. There's a statute of limitations. I got kind of trapped overnight in some place, and it wasn't the safest thing, I thought, you know. And I got back to the base somehow, and nobody asked any questions. And oh, you're back. That kind of it was loose, incredibly loose. The discipline. We didn't have officers. Once in a while, an officer would come out on the boats. Some lieutenant, you know. There were rumors going around that if they didn't give the sailors problems, because they would get problems, you know, and they were maybe apocryphal, but it did happen. The term was fragging then, you know, but there were stories going around, you know, you get in a firefight and some guy you don't like, oh, I'll be darned, he got hit by a bullet. Oh, you know, uh, those stories did get around by the time I was there, and officers were very polite and that they weren't uh, a holes, you know. Um, there's always a class thing there between enlisted and officers, you know. Even more so then. That was the old Navy. Some of the people I worked with were World War II sailors. Uh, you know, they were just really old hands, you know, and they used to put us down. Oh, you're a bunch of, you know, the names.
Mhm.
uh, it it was just incredibly uh, loose. The whole atmosphere, that well, discipline was breaking down by that stage. You know, it was the morale was at all stages. You know, the army and whatnot. And uh, I remember being out on one of my first patrols on the river, and it was very common. The guy said, "Okay, the first thing when you get in a firefight, you're likely to crap in your pants. Don't worry about it," he said. It all happens to all of us. He says, "Don't let it phase you. Just keep on going," you know. And they often would say, "Don't be a hero," you know. Your job is to survive, and that was the attitude there. Don't pull a John Wayne was a common phrase, you know. We grew up on that, you know, war hero stuff, like you can't imagine now. And if you watch '50s movies, you'd see it, you know. So it was the morale was, and also the people were not the enemy. I didn't see them as an enemy. In fact, I started admiring them again, multicultural. You know, I said, "Holy cow!" You know, they can make a weapon out of this, and I was amazed at we what they would do. You know, uh, even though they're the enemy. I never I started to kind of admire them, and now we see the Vietnamese do. This shirt is probably made in Vietnam, but the better shirts. You know? It was so I eventually I get out. It's just kind of I had an appointment to officer candidate school. You know, I had a combat action ribbon, uh, and I was going to Newport, Rhode Island, to officer school, and halfway with an idea if I'm going to have some kind of career or something. I don't know. It and I just said no. I don't. I passed that up. I said no. I'm passing on it, you know, and got out. And uh, then you're a veteran, you know. I am in California looking for jobs. Can't get anything. Just I lost 10 years of my life just drifting around. And I mean, there's Vietnam veteran stories that are a lot for. I didn't get on drugs. I didn't. end up in jail, lots of things, you just get out and you're just glad to be alive, and that's all you're thinking about, and that's all you want, You're just saying, oh well, I'll be darned, I survived. But I went to one job interview, and it said Vietnam veteran, put down your service or something. And the guy told me, the HR guy in this some corporation in California, says, "Hey, Ted, don't do that. Don't tell them you're a Vietnam veteran. Don't put that down on applications if you want to get a job. Don't do that." And I thought, oh man, I'm a hero. It's gonna give me 5 points or something. That's the way it was then. Compared to now. The veterans of Iraq and all these other wars, or that were there are heroes. And uh, we didn't get anything. I think I left with like $400 on me or something. There was just. Uh, and I look at veterans now; they're driving new cars and buying nice houses. And I lived in a single wide trailer. That's what I finally ended up in Fallon. So it was I worked various jobs. I worked, had my own sign shop for a while in Fallon. I went to New Hampshire. Somebody said it. I had a relative running a farm there. So I was a farmer, a rancher back uh, east of New York, if you look at a map. Uh, I went to Stockton, California. I worked in a big sign plant there. San Jose, I worked in San Jose in a sign shop. Years of drifting.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody goes bankrupt, it doesn't work out. I tried to get into San Jose States and get a degree in graphic design, and I'm a Vietnam veteran, man. It was the same thing. Man, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, it's going to be about 2 years before we can take you in, Mr. March. you know so there I am. I'm calling up my uncle to, can you loan me some money so I can get a U-Haul truck and get my family back to Nevada. So I kind of have that, and that always applied to my student population, the people I knew. I knew what it was like to be somewhat desperate and going from place to place to place to place to place, just from job to job, and just that thing. And a lot of my parents, of course, were going from construction site to this and that. And some of my students, I asked her, "What would you do for your vacation?" "Oh, I picked apples or something in Washington." um, I developed a 2-acre homestead in Fallon. 1979. An old lady next door whose husband died, and she had she was a, 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 a fan, an old rancher family, and she needed somebody to drive her down uh, to Mexico, to Sonora.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a place down there called Keno Bay where a lot of Americans, even then, were going. And she had a real nice trailer and a truck, and I had, between jobs or whatever, uh, drove her down there with my family and kids, and we spent a couple of months almost, I think. Um, I went to the bank and I got a loan. I said, "Can I have a loan? I'm going south of the border." And I did get a loan. And I spent a lot of time in Hermosillo, Mexico, where my current wife, is from. It's just circling around back to this. Life is weird. You're only 32, um, circling around. And this Marge she was a great old gal, and on her last years, and I pulled this huge trailer down there, and spent a lot of time in again. I never liked tourist places, so I liked Hermosillo. It was an industrial town that most Americans drive through. But I went out to bars and started meeting Mexicans, and met a doctor, and we ended up coming back at 3 in the morning. Some Mexican doctor. Um, I worked in the early '80s after Mexico. I became infatuated with Mexico, the culture, just the opposite of what a lot of Americans do. So I ended up reading books on Mexican history and the culture. There's a whole bunch of writers still on my shelf. Um, it I started taking. I said, well, oh, I met a guy there in an RV park, a Mexican guy who spoke good English, and he was doing Spanish as a second language for tourists.
Hmm.
And things were slow at night. Every night I go in there and talk with them, and Javier Mesa. Um, and I uh, well, we had good talks on what life was for him in Mexico, what he thought about the United States, back and forth. I ended up corresponding with him for years after that. Um, we'd send packages once in a while to his family, and um, and then I was studying Spanish, and then I started taking Spanish. I said, well, maybe it's a good idea to take Spanish. This is long, long before I was in ESL. So I had a Spanish teacher, Ed Arcenega, in high school, and he was my teacher in high school, and he was a ex-Marine, tough guy. He grew up in Valmy, Nevada, which was a railroad section house up there on near I-80, and he was on I think the USS Yorktown. He was one of those Marines on a ship, on a Navy ship, but he was tough. And I remember I would go into a Spanish class in high school, and even then they had some kind of multimedia. I don't know what the heck it was then, tapes or something. Little booths. You went in there and you did your Spanish lesson, between the things. And I was not the best student in high school. I'll put it that way. He would walk up behind me, and I remember he would put his hand. The teachers wouldn't do this now, on my shoulder, and he would slowly increase the pressure. Ted, have you finished today's lesson? Oh yeah, yeah. You know, but you respected this guy. He was muy macho, just a great guy. Uh, I'm back in the high school in like 1981, 80, somewhere in the early 80s, taking Spanish classes from the same teacher in the same room. But that's weird. Picture you going back to high school now after these years and taking something, and Ed is still there, and I did several semesters with him. Uh, Later, I worked with him. I To get into the schools was just a long, 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 long thing. I subbed for years. It was hard to get a job. I was late in my 40s. Um, I One summer I worked on the school maintenance team, and they had a paint crew, and Ed was the paint crew. Then he was retired then from teaching. So I'm up there painting around toilets and things in the schools in the summer, uh, and then I got to meet Ed on kind of a more adult level, and just he was getting pretty old then. And he told me about being a Marine. I was always interested in the wars, and he was told me what it was. The USS Yorktown was a carrier in the Battle of the Coral Sea. One of those, I forget exactly, but it was sunk by a kamikaze. He was a young Marine standing up there, and he was telling me, yeah, I remember that kamikaze, and he said it hit what they call that tower on a aircraft carrier, hit it. And he said, I remember looking up there and a pipe was hanging over, just blowing steam. They broke a steam pipe. They were steam generators then, all over it. And just that kind of memories of it. One of those World War II veterans I gravitated towards. I grew up with that in the 50s. My father was a kind of a roughneck bar fly. That's what they did in the 50s. And in the 50s, you could go into bars in Arizona when we lived there, and the little kid, okay, here's a 7-Up, you sit down on that end of the bar. But you were listening to all these old Marines and guys, you know, from early ages, talk about World War II. And Ed was one of them, And I didn't know this till many years later, who he was. But again, it was, I'm in a fallon there, and I worked in various things there. Uh, I went back to Mexico with my mother. She was terminal, dying, and like 1981, sometime a couple of years later. And one day she pops up, says, "I want to go to Mexico." Huh? Okay. And so we flew down there on Mexicana Airlines and to Mexico City. Spent several weeks, and I was walking her across avenidas of 6 lanes. It was awful. She could just barely walk, So I'd leave her in a motel most of the time. She was exhausted, and she liked to talk to the maids in the hotel. She was like that. She was a mining camp minority girl who always had something. She didn't want to talk to the important people. She talked to the maids, and they liked her. I said, "Oh, what?" I come back from touring the pyramids or something, just walking all over Mexico. Like I did that because I did that in Vietnam. I love to do that. Go out and where the tourists don't even go, To go to the pyramids, I got on a Mexican bus. It looked like an old school bus then. They didn't have the best buses, and rode out in the damn jungle out there for half the day. And I was wondering where I ended up finally getting to the pyramids. But it was a wonderful trip, and that was kind of old Mexico City. It's different now. Uh, I remember we were at the Chapultepec Castle
Mhm.
with my mother. We were lining up, with tourists, and you had to get in line to go into it. And I was looking over there, and there were some campesinos, and I was sort of, I was kind of point. Look at those, man! They look like they're just off of they Chiapas or something. They were, you get down south more, and there's more. They're different than people in Sonora even. And she really castigated me, and she says, "God damn it, Ted, stop that. They're they have as much right to see Chapultepec as we do." That's the way she was. She kind of slapped me around a little bit verbally, even as an old lady, not to disrespect those other people, you know. So my training,
Mhm.
um, it often reminded me. They said when you're in teaching, the students don't care what you know as much as who you are. Somebody told me that along the line, you could be the best math teacher, the best anything teacher. They don't give a damn. They care who you are. Then you can teach them math or science or whatever it is, and that's just gone away in American education, very much so. They don't like that. Uh, I worked construction, Silver State construction for a while. I just drifting around doing different things. Um, I started in a community college. I highly recommend, and I've told students for years, community college is good. You know, a lot of girls, I said, okay, you're going to maybe in a trailer with some guy that left you 6 months ago, but you go to the community college and start a class. Just start. That's what I did. I said, there's not a chance, but it was good for me. I went and I said, public speaking might be a good thing to take. I was a shy kid, single, how do you put it? Only kid, only child type, introvert. I am an introvert. Uh, so I said, I better take a speech class. I did that, I took psychology. I've always been interested in, and I took psychology classes. Um, and it's different as an adult going back. If you go back, I hope you go back into some degree program because you're a different person after that. I then I ended up at UNR. I borrowed $25,000 from a rich uncle because I didn't have I had two kids and a wife, right? Uh, to but I took off about a year and did teacher education classes. And fought my way through that. They wanted to make it. Oh, you got to do 101 and 102 and this and that. I said I would go into some professor's class and I said, this is crap. Look, I'm 43 years old. I got kids and a wife. I can't spend this much time. And they would just waive the class. So go in and be assertive. You can get things done. It's amazing. Oh, okay, we'll cross off these three classes. You can take this number 4, whatever it was, and you're good, to go. Um, I ended up as a 40-something-year-old, and this was the early part of what they called, I forget, they used to call them retreads, old guys who go back into college. And you're sitting there with a bunch of, then it was more college kids, early 20s, just out of high school thing. And you have a different relationship with the professors, and actually you can make friends with them sometimes. They go out and have coffee with them. You're not one of the kids, and that was good. It was tough, but night classes, did a lot of night classes. Even after I got a job in ESL, I had to finish up some ESL credits and things. So I mean, after working, I would go drive in and do night classes and drive back to Fallon at 1 a.m. Uh, but I had about 3 or 4 years of just subbing. I was high school security for a while, sitting in a pickup truck in a parking lot in a high school lot. I mean, so I kind of seen all sides of it. I always got along with janitors and you know maintenance people. Some of my best friends in the schools were maintenance people, not other teachers. Uh, we were simpatico. Uh,
No, still to this day, like hearing you talk about all of this information and everything, I said, it kind of brings me back to a lot of the conversations that we actually had during the counseling sessions, and I guess a lot of the way that I also interacted with both teachers and maintenance people, even at Fernley High School, especially. So it's really interesting that the sometimes that the people you look up to technically tend to have some of those same qualities of the type of people that you kind of gravitate to, and you retelling it, it makes it even more entertaining, the fact that it's like, wow, subconsciously or unknowingly have a very similar and very, very specific traits in certain ways. So, but touching more on the school stuff. So you continued through subbing and multiple different types of jobs in during the late 80s, mid 80s to late 80s, even after like all the rejection of what we already know now to be one of the most common things for Vietnam vets, especially since there was never really any fanfare. It was one of the most contested and definitely disliked conflicts for a lot of people in the United States. But how long after that were you still facing issues? I guess after you stopped letting them know that you were a Vietnam vet, especially returning back to UNR and being a substitute teacher.
Yeah, well, there was always a friction in going to school at UNR with professors. I was sitting in the back of the room sometimes, and I knew all of them, most of them. They were smarter than me. They knew how to drive they were draft dodgers, basically.
Gotcha.
That generation, a lot of them are around my age, and I just knew that, and I had a heavy resentment, and I mean, I just a prejudice, that, and I had to, finally say, no, I was the dumb guy. They were smart. They didn't go to Vietnam. uh, this thing about the 50th anniversary, I watched. It was a British program, and the guy just said, both of them, those lives were lost for nothing. So it's just the opposite of what we hear from our media. It was for nothing. All of those American lives and other lives, of course, were 4 million brown people, 3 to 4 million, Vietnamese. Um, but I had a heavy resentment. I remember that. It was just, you're pissed, you're mad, there's anger just built in, it's just, you can't get over it, and I look at some of those professors, and I just,
Yeah.
I don't know. I said, you a-hole. And that wasn't probably fair. I was wrong at that stage. I'm talking about myself at that stage, resentful. Yeah. It, but anyway, I got, through it, and I had no idea that I was going to be an ASL. I thought I was certified to teach regular English and art. And because I worked in graphic design and art for years and years, and etc. I had a fine arts degree and all of that useful stuff. Uh, it I talked to somebody in a school district in Fallon. I don't know, somebody there in a district office, and she said, "Oh, you're." I guess, oh, you're taking Spanish classes. Oh, yeah, I like Spanish. I really enjoy it. I spent a couple of years I would buy a textbook, a high school textbook, and I would did every page and every exercise in it. I would go down through the dictionary and obsessively, at night, make lists of vocabulary words. There was some Spanish TV. I would watch Spanish TV. Very little. Uh, it reminds me, I recently read a book by Malcolm X, the civil rights leader. He was in prison. He was a gangbanger in the 40s. But he said that's the best thing that could happen to him. He read the whole Merriam-Webster dictionary in prison, every page, and took notes on everything. to stay sane. He was in solitary confinement for a while, and started reading books. He got an education. He was a dropout in prison reading books, and I've always been a strong, my mother was a reading teacher. She was and I always emphasize that with the kids. And it's where was I get out, and I finally this woman says, "Yeah, you're Spanish. Oh, I see you're taking. Oh, yeah, I love it. I'm. Oh, well, have you thought about ESL? That was her thing. There's a conference in Tonopah, and you can get 3 credits or something going down there for a week." And I did. I had an old 4-wheel drive Jeep Land Cruiser. I drove it down there and took classes and met other ESL teachers and people and got materials. And this is before the internet. There was information was on paper. And that got me kind of started in that direction on ESL. And I went to various school districts, etc. And then I went to a Lyon County, like a teacher's fair. Maybe it was at UNR. Talked to an administrator, assistant, superintendent. Maybe it was a superintendent. Hey, oh, you were interested in ESL. I see you got blah, 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 Well, there's this place in Fernley. I know where it is. And the ESL teacher left, this Kathy somebody. And we really need somebody there, So, you just have to be persistent and keep. I must say one thing about my military career, such as it was, is you learn to slog on, and just take the hits and keep moving, and don't let it get you down, Uh, I must say that you learned some kind of endurance, just getting through the hellhole. I'm not even talking about the war, just the everything,
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
it just I got along in boot camp. That's just kind of funny. My father was old fashioned, I called him up from boot camp and I said, "Thank you for being an asshole, Dad, because I'm not having any problem in boot camp." There were guys crying and everything,
Mhm.
and they couldn't handle it, Um, and I became kind of friends with the what the chief. I forget what you called him, the drill instructor in an army, but
The recruit division commanders, RDCs.
yeah, the guy
Yeah.
there, he drank a little bit too much, and he said that, "Oh, I see you got a degree. This stuff pays off." He says, "We got a lot of sailors here that, man, their literacy is not very high. Can you teach them classes?" So I went through the whatever manuals we had then for this and that, naval stuff, and okay, I'm teaching classes. I'm just washing my dungarees out at 4 in the morning like everybody else, but you know, and he was a World War II type, and he kind of drank too much. And there were times he said, he'd be in his office, kind of, "Can you cover for me?" And that's the way it was. Don't tell anybody.
No, no. I mean, I can
You can
definitely.
edit this out.
It definitely the curriculum's definitely changed a lot. So like,
And they were tough then. That people they wanted you to cry.
oh yeah.
We went to we were sent to the one thing I missed gunnery school, but I went to a SEER school that was
Mm.
survival, evasion,
And
escape, resistance. I think something like that
yep.
in Whidbey Island, in the
In the
in the
middle of the wood of
in
northern
the pine
Washington.
trees
Mm-hmm.
to do jungle training. We're running around. It's looked like Lake Tahoe, but we did have a 3 days of escape. Then they would catch you. I remember running across a road and they catch you. And they were dressed up like communists. Like North Koreans or something. And there was a little prison, a mock prison. They may still have it. It was mainly for pilots who parachuted out. They had something like that instead during the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
Few people know that out here, But we were. I remember spending a night in a box. You couldn't, like a telephone booth, but you couldn't stand up or sit down. And they're playing Chinese music and everything, and driving you crazy, pulling you out. And nothing to eat for 3 days, learning what that's like. They passed out worms for starters on a paper plate. And okay, everybody, here's your worms. Get over it, get used to it. Because you're going to have to. And that was actually good training. To you can to get you to handle that stuff. Sears school, I kind of used a lot of that later in life, I think, but even in the school, just. But on the other hand, that was good because many times you had to deal with bosses. It's just like that anything, the military or you know some a-hole principal or something, and they're trying to ruin your day. That's what they do. Most people, I would say 80%, I got along great with them, but I thought to myself, screw that. Any day that nobody's not shooting at you is a good day. I just learned to kind of stand up to that. Not be just take it, and not be aggressive or inflammatory or start a fight, but you're dealing with a superior. I had one principal one time at FIS. He drove a motorcycle. I don't know if he he was kind of a he walked in my office. I had the old office there in the FIS. It was the ESL room. I don't know if you were there then or what, but he walked in and the door. He was just like that. Just the shit hit the fan, you know. These teachers are mad at you. You haven't covered this and that, you know. And he was trying to bully me, you know. And I just sort of pushed back, you know, and I said, "Yeah, I'm just about ready to quit this job, you know." And he said, "Yeah, I feel like quitting too." We became friends ever after that, you know. I go down to Mexico and he'd have me pick up 4 or 5 bottles of he was tequila and bring him back. You know, I was a runner, a coyote
Yeah.
for this principal, and he was a drinker and a hardy writer. You may know who I'm talking about. I don't know.
I might, but I'm still kind
Yeah,
of
he was kind of a heavy football player type.
Yep. I have a very unique experience with him that I can talk about
Yeah,
offline. But yeah, he was a very
he was kind of notorious.
yeah, he's a very unique individual, especially as a principal, being a middle school principal. But I can understand that.
But he was actually not a bad guy. You know, it's just one of those you run into them, even in the military, this a hole or something like that. And no, you said no, they're okay. You find out that's what I've learned in this life a lot. You know, a lot of people at first they trigger me like now. What do they say? You know, it's
Mhm.
they're in my safe space. uh, uh, they turn out to be, you know, you see them, they're actually good guys. They're not at first, but they're their enemy or something, you know. And you can get along with them, you know. You got to push back against their BS, you know,
Yeah.
and they respect that, you know. And I used to tell people that kids and things, you know, you just push back, you know, and find out, you know, that's the way you deal with bullies. Uh, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's a different type of characteristic that that I think both being in the military and just experiencing life in general is something that is is very unique. Is very unique to being social in that way. And when you really take it and try to wrap around the entire situation and every experience is like there's been just a little bit too much pushback in the opposite direction with trying to go with the flow and not trying
Yeah.
to rock the boat or be confrontive, I guess, in that
Uh-huh.
sense. And it really does stem, like I can say from my personal experience, especially growing up, is that the the lack of being able to be listened is one of those things that I did learn and recognize a lot more now that I'm older was that um I guess our generation and the following generations were just being not listened so much more, where this whole idea of having a safe space and trying to maintain yourself within your own bubble is a psychological regressionary form of defense.
Uh-huh.
And it's true, it is true, is in the way that you said it, is like, oh, stay away from my safe space. Like, yeah, stay away from my safe space. But that's the thing that I don't think that people tend to see outside of the normal when you're talking about it. But you as a teacher, as an educator, but also as a veteran and being a person who's experienced a different level of life, you have that level of experience and that type of that unique knowledge when it comes to the types of interactions that you've had. Because from everything that you've already said so far is not only just kind of taking down those social constructs of the political and the amoral at that sense while growing up, but also just kind of having that fortitude to be able to go past the perceived notion of like, hey, you're in Vietnam, you're outside in Las Vegas in a very dangerous situation. You're in Mexico. You're in now obviously now one of the most dangerous cities in I guess in the country, one of the dangerous cities in the country, just due to its lack of resources in certain aspects, but also just the, like you're saying, the whole thing is just like going outside of that normalcy. So it's really interesting to hear, like I said, to hear it from a different generation, and try to try to piece together. It's like, all right, where are things going now with the current situation, and with the way that we still interact as people, that I think we've socially lost in a certain sense, I guess I can say.
Yeah, all veterans have a commonality. I've talked to the current generation of Iraq, Afghanistan. They're my neighbors. They're all over the place here. There's a lot of veterans living here. There's a place outside of town I went up to where it's kind of semi-homeless. It's kind of an undeveloped area out on Interstate 80. I went out there with my wife one time, and it was kind of weird. A bunch of ramshackle buildings and things, and we're parked there eating a sandwich, and the guy comes up, "Hey, what are you doing here?" "Well, we're out here." And I got talking to, "Oh, we're all Vietnam veterans. They're out living like hermits out there." Bunch of wackies. They have that reputation of being a wackadoodle. And that was what I probably experienced, when I was trying to get jobs. You were seeing as unstable, and there were movies about,
Oh yeah.
the crazy Vietnam veteran loses his mind and kills everybody.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, especially just because like the way that even the late 80s to early 90s media portrayed Vietnam, and a lot of the veterans, like Born in the USA. I know that one, that was a very specific one with Tom Cruise. I think Platoon. I mean, I guess the story of that story in general, but there's actually another one.
Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now. Yep.
That was not about veterans, but it was the weirdness that there was a Navy involvement there. Remember the riverboats?
Oh yeah.
Right on. When I first saw that years ago, I said, "Holy shit!"
Yeah.
Nightmarish, weird.
Oh yeah. Yep. With same thing with Taxi Driver, and I think Taxi Driver, The Deer Hunter, and there's just a couple movies like in the way in the portrayals, but it's like it's that level of adversity, and the way that the what do you call it? I guess the way that the culture in general kind of shifted past the conflict to finding somebody to be able to blame in a lot of ways, and I guess it is just how it kind of turned out, and I think now at this point in I guess our current our more modern way of recognition, at least the ones that are still practicing that modern way of recognition, to be able to observe and try to dissect the past, is that I don't want to say the atrocities, but the damage, the psychological, the social, the economic, and even the virtuous type of damage that was done, not only to the Vietnamese people, but also the people that were sent there, there to be able to participate in this unstable conflict. It's very different to it's a very difficult conversation to have with somebody who supports the troops versus having that conversation with somebody who is a troop, or has had some experience, at least like I said, personally within the past 12 years of my service is very different. Is a very different conversation, because even talking to the younger service members, they kind of hold a little bit of a different type of apprehension towards the military, and it's not disdain, or I can even say any type of I guess disdain or remorse in the way that they do it. It's a very unique way. It's a very unique interaction that I haven't been able to hear spoken or replicated in a lot of ways, having talked to the veterans from the 90s, from the Desert Storm or Desert Shield conflicts, as well as the early stages of the Iraq and Afghanistan war. It's very different. It's very different, but it also speaks of the times. It speaks of the times in the way that the shift in the reasons why people join the military.
Thank you for your service. You're going to hear this
Yeah,
all the time.
you hear,
And I'm
yeah.
one of those and I've learned that a lot of veterans, it makes them uneasy.
Mhm.
They don't like that. And you finally realize, no, that's not about you and your service. That's about them. That
Mhm.
makes them feel better. It's kind of a virtue signaling.
Yeah.
People who haven't been in the military.
Oh yeah, we hate it. it's
I, thank you for your service.
it's like,
Lately, I've been saying, well, I served my time being stupid. And, sometimes I'll say something like that. Just I
yeah,
don't want to reject them. I know what it is that they need to feel better.
yeah.
Maybe there's a little guilt on their part
In a
because they're,
sense,
they're perhaps, I don't know. I just don't know. But
yeah. There's yeah.
but
There's
the image of various generations, it's kind of like Hispanics movies about Hispanics with
mhm.
that's how many times things have you seen our adventure in Mexico for any movie. My wife and I are always laughing. Here we go,
Yep.
it's going to be violent and
Uh,
everything is just dangerous and oh
yeah.
God, you
It's
know.
yeah. It's a lot of changes. It was just like things that come to mind, and things
ah,
that are just visibly jarring, just visibly jarring when it comes to things like that. But well, keeping a little bit actually with this is it seems that, to me, at least to me, from, like I said, from the people that I know, the people that I've both interviewed and other service members that have left the military. Um, Funnily enough, because I peak, yeah, within the episode itself, one of my service members, one of my buddies I was actually stationed on the ship with, he actually became an educator as well. He became a teacher. He's currently 5 years in, and same thing, a bit of a similar struggle to yourself, Ted. And same thing with a couple of the substitute teachers right there at Fernley High School that were either that were veterans or served in the
mhm.
military in some way. It seems like there's a bit of a calling, a very specific type of calling, to be able to try to educate and to be able to help the up and coming generations, the younger ones. This is more of an opinionated question. How how do you see that? Is if there is a specific reasoning that attracted you to be able to be an educator, just like I said, the other people that I may have met, like, what would be your reasoning on why you became a an educator?
Yeah, why I became. Huh. Well, my mother was a dedicated teacher, old fashioned, started in the 1930s. Like I told you, worked in black schools. She worked and taught high school in San Francisco and uh, Arizona. And I always got that teaching ethic. It's a helping, it used to be called a helping profession, like a nurse or something. And I had a number of aunts like that too. And I got certain values for my mother eventually. And I was very sorry that she never lived to see me become a teacher or start even. She died in the early 80s. It was always saddened me that, and I was kind of a Vietnam veteran loser for a number of years. And uh, I don't know, that's been reframed a little bit, but it's kind of like I used to tell some of the Hispanic kids, don't, I look at them, don't let them put you down. Come on, stop that. Even some tough one, I had some in high school, they were from California, gangbangers. They were gangs, in trouble. In the office, I met them in a principal's office. And I would just talk to them and I said, you're too smart for this. Come on, stop this. And I would approach it that way. Everybody else is, you're just too intelligent to be doing this. And I'm kind of giving an idea, don't blow your cover, whatever you're doing, okay? Just kind of cool it. Don't cause problems here in the school.
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know. It's just there's a certain street smarts, and you're talking about the veterans teacher, and then that reminded me of some I knew. They were some of the best teachers I knew at the time, including an Army veteran, a woman
Mhm.
who was in the Army, you know, sometime back in the 90s there at FIS. But yeah, they were some of the best teachers, and they had something. There was something about them, that the kids saw and recognized maybe, and a lot of them just didn't put up with a lot of nonsense, like other teachers, and they just weren't. At least they were that. It is a military
Mhm.
maybe or whatever it is, that they came from. I knew an ex-chief at later at Silverland School who had a lot of stories about the new Navy. Where wow, I grew up in the kind of the old Navy, World War II guys, and they didn't care what you thought, they would call you names and everything else. So that's where I said, "Thank you, Dad, for being an asshole." When I was a kid, I could handle it. Um,
Yeah.
he was in the Army in the 1920s. Oh, much tougher than me. All those older generations were just tougher.
Yeah. And that's how it kind of seems. Every single generation, previous generation, is just a little bit tougher and takes a different type of beating,
It
different type of
seems like
beating.
it. Yeah, the young people nowadays, they got their challenges too. I'm not one of those kind to put them down. Uh, Even a young kid, I used to kind of I go out to the Fallon airport and there's a bunch of old guys out there. I have an old airplane out there and I hang around that, and a lot of them are all ex-military and the kids nowadays and the blah blah blah. You hear all of this, and I would say, wow, this is the best generation that there is. They're so smart, compared
Mhm.
to what we were. We were dumbasses. They don't want to hear that.
No, it's
Uh,
yeah.
you
It's
know, they don't want to hear that. It's it right now. This Generation X. What's that's the X Y? No, Generation Z.
yeah.
That's interesting to look at that. I've spent some time looking at that. My own kids are Generation X losers. I guess that's a generation. You're Y or something. I don't know
Yeah,
what you are. Yeah, you're not
why
Z.
millennials?
Yeah,
It's
millennial. You're a millennial.
millennials. I'm
Yeah.
yep.
But I've been telling people I have the highest regard for this generation uh, uh, Z now, the newest ones. The kids who are early 20s.
Oh yeah.
And it's basically based on my anti-war feelings. They're the ones that are on social media protesting what's happening in Palestine. You know, and they're the only one. They have a moral compass that I see other generations, even my own children now who are in their 50s.
Hmm.
Uh, they're just they don't. I don't know.
Yeah. It's
They've never been in the military, never, etc. They just,
oh yeah. And like I mentioned, it's a very unique situation with kind of like how every single generation takes its own hits in its own way, but it's this the what's what I find really interesting about the younger ones, the early 20s to the late teens to the early to mid 20s is their way of trying to find ways to be able to make that difference that I wanted to make while I was their age as well. But due to both circumstances, limiting resources, and lack of access to be able to voice certain things, even growing up in a technologically advanced time, it was still very difficult just because of the still early to mid portion development of the internet, the World Wide Web, how it was back then. It really surprises me how quickly they've taken to adapting to be able to use it as such a easily attainable tool to be able to spread the information, to be able to rally, and to be able to make themselves heard. Maybe not in the best ways, just like any other subsect in any generation. maybe not in the most for some people, or in some small fringe groups, maybe not the most ideal way. That isn't exactly helping the society, or the actual taking light into the problems. But you're very right. It takes a lot to try to be these smart as young individuals as they are, and they've taken their resources and they ran with it. If anything, they're flying right now. That's the best way I can say it.
I live on YouTube. I'm basically alone most of the time, and that's why I probably talk too much now. You beat
Oh.
old guys, and oh, hey, there's somebody I can talk to. Uh, I watch all kinds of YouTube from all over the world, and they're this youngest generation. Many times I like, oh, that's just a kid, but they're so damn good at what they're doing. If you're watching good, whatever the
Mhm.
topic is, they're great. My God, when I look at us, we, that they're using the resources for all kinds of things that are good causes, like you are. It's the same thing. That's I think you're going to develop this into a resource that's going to further whatever your aims are, your group, your ESL, the Hispanic, whatever, veterans. The topics are endless.
Mhm. Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah. Well,
so I don't know where you just cut me off and we can finish it if you want. I'm
oh
fine.
my bad. No, like that's
Um,
actually, speaking with that, is like that's actually where I wanted to lead into it. Is mainly the that portion, this portion of your education, being an educator, being a teacher, is once you started as a teacher, and literally returned back to the roots of where you were at. That's one of the things that I didn't know or realize, especially, like I said, growing up, is how much time and how much of a change and difference you made in the community in Fernley, Nevada. If anybody else has told you that, outside of other teachers or other awards or accolades, is that your presence made such a huge difference that I don't think you recognize how much it affected just not only one individual, but a lot of people. And with the ESL classes, especially with the change in generations and everything, with everything that you wrote down, skimming through the notes again, is like you took a lot of those resources and you redeveloped them to be able to help the community, starting off in the early 2000s or the late 90s. How was that, if you want to continue from where you left off?
well, there was a day, let's say the first day, you're in your 40s, you're starting a new career. Uh, it's you're not in your comfort zone, but you get used to that being a veteran.
Oh, yeah.
You're out of your comfort zone. You think about it. You've been pushed out of your comfort zone. Then you find out what you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we live and we thrive on chaos. That's one of the
Yeah,
things I've
and you
learned.
think, oh, I'll be damned. I can't believe it. But I can do that. Whatever it is. You take a gulp here and there, and oh well.
Yep. Oh yeah.
uh, I remember that first year. It was towards the end of the year, and I was walking over there at the elementary school. I remember they were all connected after hours, and I just stopped for a minute and I said, "Damn, thank you, God, you put me in this place. This is wonderful." That was the most fulfilling thing. You got to have something where a mission and a fulfillment. And I literally, it may sound corny, but I think that God put you there, you jerk, to deal with these Mexicanos, these kids, and fight the system. I did a lot of that. I didn't make myself popular with the school a lot of times, but from year one, uh, and it was really wonderful in a lot of ways because I felt I was on a mission, so to speak. I don't know what it was. I just knocked myself out. Even the adult classes, the night classes, I did those for years, and because I got to know the community. This was before I was married into the Hispanic group.
Oh yeah.
I literally got married um, into a Mexican family in Mexico. um, but it was just I don't know, this the underdog kind of a thing, and man, I'm gonna do as much as I can for them and get as much as I can, and you know, I found the word is fulfillment, and that's important in a career, whatever it is. I would tell somebody eventually, and you can go through a lot of shit if you're have a mission.
Mhm.
Uh, I yeah, like I said, I was taking the I taught K through 12 when I got there. There was just it was kind of neat. It's kind of like you're dumped in the middle of the ocean, someplace on an island, and I had a wonderful principal. That's one thing. And she says, Ted, I trust you. You know, she was sometimes she would wave. I would kind of look depressed because that's the way I can be depressed. And I'd walk in, and what's the matter? Oh, I'm just. She says, "Well, okay, you got 5 minutes to be depressed." She was like the chief in the Navy. And he said, "Get off your ass and get to work," you know, and you'll get under. She told me that's the best way to get out of the dumps. Get to work at something like that. And she was great that way. But she would say, "I trust you, Ted." I said, "What about this and that?" Okay, do it. I wish they were glad to have somebody there. It sounded like. uh, so sometimes in life you walk into a situation where you're actually wanted and you're doing something. um, uh, so I ended up, K through 12 and four school kindergarten. Here I am, this 40 something year old. What was that kindergarten cop? They had kindergarten in the LDS church, a Mormon church here
Mhm.
when I came here. They didn't have room then. It's hard to believe.
Yep.
And I would go over there and what am I going to do? I talked to parents and got to know the kids. And I teaching night ESL was a great experience. Uh, I interacted. I wrote down here the mainstream staff. Most teachers are good people. They were. They just, especially then. The old fashioned. They were kind of like my mother. Some of them. They were kind, and I had a kind of a rule. Kind of, I knew that this teacher. I would tell my aide, Laura, that she's okay with the Mexican kids. Okay, don't antagonize her like you
Mhm.
like to, you know, just get along. And this teacher's maybe not so good. And some were Hispanic. Some were antagonistic. Uh, God, I remember one teacher at a school, unnamed, or she would use the word wetbacks for students, for kids, fourth graders. And I had to bite my tongue, and that's one of those things. And my strategy was, okay, she's what she is. And I it doesn't matter what I think. I've got to get along with her in the interest of these kids. Okay, I'm not going to start. And I used to tell my aide this, who was inclined to start fights, women, women and women. uh, and I said, no, we have to get along with this teacher. I know you're right. You're right. And just cool it. And many times you'd kind of win them over slowly. Just get them kind of on the student side. I remember talking about, and I learned one thing. Damn, these kids are intelligent as a group. I was, I took lots of testing and statistics and everything, and they were high on the intelligence scale. Um, I said, well, and then I thought to myself, what kind of people immigrate? I got talking to some of these girls who crossed the border in a pickup truck. I remember one telling me, yeah, my sister froze to death in the pickup truck. They had stories. They all had stories. I later saw this in Sonora when I was living there, uh, on the border on both sides. Um, who immigrates? And I wrote down in my notes, the brave and the intelligent. And this phrase, Homer the Brave, there's a book, I should have got it, written by a Hispanic guy about the border. He's a famous. author. He was writing about Tijuana,
Mm-hmm.
the people living on the junkyards over there who cross over. He said the title of the chapter was "Home of the Brave, Tijuana."
Mm-hmm.
Who immigrates? My grandmother coming over as a UPS package. But even more extreme was crossing this border. You know, the stupid people. No, I don't think so. People who are cobardes, I don't think so. No, that's the home of the brave. And intelligent. The most intelligent people immigrate. My family immigrated out of Europe because they were draft dodgers. They didn't want to get in the First World War. That which started in Serbia, where they were from. But they didn't like to hear this. They didn't like this, and it took me a while. Oh, I'm complimenting these kids. Wow, that kid's got a lot of potential. That girl is chick. Oh, wow. And I got a blank, you know, sort of a blank look too many times. Some agreed, oh yeah, wow, they could, a good teacher could see that she's an intelligent kid. Look how fast she's learning English or whatever. Uh, I got a cold reception, at administrative meetings. Sometimes I'd go to the district office and I would do presentations. Here's the wonderful Hispanic students, and it was kind of looking around a room at a bunch of administrators. And it wasn't it's kind of like if somebody said that, I don't know what, if they said the Marine Corps, or you're in the Navy, if they said, the Air Force is one of the best service there is, if you went into a Navy meeting, they would look at you like, get out of here. In my Navy, they used to say, you're some bad names. Wimps, I'll put it, a bunch of wimps, you should have joined the Air Force. They were real snotty towards the Air Force. They're just a bunch of wimps. uh, but that was it was difficult in general to express the positive attributes of Hispanic students and their parents too, for that matter. Many times they always assumed that she just cleans rooms and they pick fruit or something like that. I got to know them. No, they had degrees, a number of these. In one's a nurse, one's an accountant, one's this, one's that. Their background was very, very different than what the Anglo stereotype perception is. But whatever they are, they're hard, hard workers. And they don't like to hear that either. I still fight this battle. It's just, and I've been in Mexico. I said, well, yeah, I guess they are. They're excellent at running casinos, restaurants, because they've been working in taquerias when they were 5 years old in Mexico, or I see them working on cars. Like it looks like the 50s to me sometimes, but the little kid is always working on a car with his dad or something like that. Learning stuff. Uh, yeah, I did have a contractor tell me at some family meet. I've got some rich relatives in Reno, and just some guy I didn't really know at a cocktail party. And he was a contractor. He did drywall and stuff like that. A rich guy. He said, "Thank God for my Mexican workers. I would have nothing without them." And in this group of Republicans, he was getting the cold shoulder from them. But he was expressing that outright. He said they show up on time, they work hard, they're reliable. I worked in a casino in Fallon where I talked to the owner. It was so different before the Hispanic group was in great numbers in Nevada. Uh, I was doing work for him, and I would sit down and give him an estimate on something. One day he's there, the owner of the Nugget. This guy owns a couple of casinos there, rich guy, local, and Mike Loff. Um, he looks around and the tables are dirty. What the hell is this? We're in a cafe. Oh, so and so didn't show up. The Anglo dishwashers and cooks were tended to be drinkers. then, and they were just unreliable. They didn't show up that day. He got up and put an apron on and grabbed a cart and went around bussing tables, cleaning off tables like I did in a nugget. And he just wanted all the other employees to see him doing that. He was making a scene. That's the way it was for getting workers in a casino then. And of course now it's the the industry would collapse. I'm sure Trump is hearing this right now. He's on the phone. Those casino executives are saying, "Hey, you're going to ruin the economy of Nevada. That ain't going to happen. They're just going to have to close off the Vegas highway completely if the Hispanics leave." There was something like years ago, 300,000 there. That you don't realize that we were in Vegas. That's, I'm sure it's more, but 300,000 Mexican workers in Vegas. So, you know, uh, the parents, the students, everybody, and most of the Hispanic kids had a strong work ethic, uh, and they remind me of way kids were in the 50s in my group. They were like that. Everybody worked on cars and did stuff and worked on jobs, and that's a thing of the past. You can't get somebody to mow a lawn here or shovel a snow, like you used to. Um, so I started communicating, who are these people? There was a Western movie. What was that? Butch Cassidy and a Sundance Kid. If you haven't seen it, see it.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have.
Oh yeah.
There's these guys way out there. They're the Pinkerton cops chasing them, and they're looking out across the desert. And they, day after day after day, they see this group. They keep saying, "Who are those guys? Who are those guys?" They're persistent. And I did a version of that for the Anglo community. Who are those guys? They were saying, "Oh, well, they're invading our country or something." That, and they're looking at and more and taquerias every place. When it, in the year 2000 or the 90s for sure, my wife has pointed this out. There was one or two taquerias in, say, Reno even. Now I don't know what it is, 80, 100, who knows. Uh, the Hispanic influence has expanded greatly. Back east, my God, even, it's just, my daughter went to Sweden years ago, and they had a taqueria there. She brought me back a taqueria menu from Stockholm. It's a diaspora, the Mexican diaspora. Uh, that's the way writers have written about it. It's interesting to think about it that way. um, so a lot of what I did was I learned and more about this. Who are these people? And try to communicate in a positive way to balance out the negative stuff that you are always hearing. Like we laugh at, oh yeah, I have relatives still say, "Hey, would you?" "Oh, I'd never go to Mexico. It's so dangerous." "Yeah, it's so friggin' safe and sparks at night." Or California, you name it. It's Fernley.
Yeah.
Uh, I tell them, Hermosillo is a city of about 1 million now, and it's a major gritty city in northern Mexico. And when I first went there, I flew down there, flew to Mexico. It was great. Oh my God, you're going to get robbed, you're going to get stolen. I landed at the Hermosillo airport, and the Mexican Air Force is there, you know, guarding everything, and I go in and blah, 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 and I get situated and everything, and get the sticker, and they were really great. And they're guarding the airplanes. That doesn't happen at small airports. Well, it's a big airport there, but they're there. Um, I walked around for that first week. This gringo, I stand out like a sore thumb. Just like Vietnam. I'm the white guy and everybody else is Asian. One Chinese guy told me, he says, you may not like us, but there's more of my faces than your faces in the world. And that's the way it was in Vietnam, Mexico. You I walked around this city, every place for a week. I had zero problems in terms of feeling uneasy or, like you would name a city in this country. Zero, Reno. Uh, I remember one drunk came out of an alley and said, he was, that was it. Uh, there was not, um, youth struck me too then. Uh, I would be a 50 something year old guy. I was in my late 50s then, walking down the street, and I hear a bunch of teenagers coming, and they're teenagers, blah, blah, they're all over the place. They see me, they kind of get quiet and stop, and they walk by kind of respectfully. And then when they get past me, then they go back to being Mexican teenagers. It was weird compared to what you get here, that now it's F words and everything. You're lucky if you only had 17 F words in a group of teenagers on the street, any place here, Well, what a difference in culture. It is, and the people were the cops. They're fine. Just don't be an a-hole. I tell a lot of Americans, I just act normal, don't stop the arrogance or whatever they have, just be normal, and the cops are fine, a hell of a lot better than a lot of the cops I've run in Philadelphia, for example, years ago, or coming back across the border patrol. I mean, it feels like East Germany, but the Mexican border officials, that's not a big deal there. I had a trailer full of equipment. For a while, I had somebody giving me computers. I had tons of computers. I took them to a school I know down there, and I had a trailer behind. I got an old 96 Dodge RV, and I pull into the Mexican side there, the aduana, and they look at it. Oh, what are those? Those are computers, Oh, I said, oh, here we go, you know. And I said, it's for a school. They're old ones. I'm donating them. They work, et cetera, et cetera. No problem. Pásale, you know. American side, I got nailed for having unlabeled dog food one time. I've crossed the border in Mexico for nearly 40 years now, and I've compared the cultures, and it's just laughable, the stereotypes. Yeah, I'm sure if you go see a Ciudad Juarez or certain places, any place, it's not a good idea at night. But it's and of course I've lived there summers. I had time off with my Mexican family and meeting just everybody. Some of them were workers in the border, the usual. One in Alaska, sheetrocking, and I talked to another one getting drunk in the backyard, working in Salt Lake. I remember him saying that he had less racism in Utah, in Salt Lake, Mormons, than any place. He said they were the nicest people to him. Then he said in Tucson, in Arizona, it was worse.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Weird.
Yeah. Those types of interactions are very, very strange, and it's really eye-opening hearing from your experience, especially like you said, over the past 40 years of traveling between two different countries, not only assimilating yourself with the culture from your personal interest and your entire life in general, just how interactive you've been with the minorities and just ethnic groups in general, just speaking on the mere fact that how you're just pointing out that the the often two common similarities when it comes to immigration in general, and talking about that whole sense of the necessity to be able to try to make it through to and survive and try to thrive in a location like this. And
Yeah, I found it stimulating, exciting.
yeah, and I think that's where you're also correct, is like where I think a lot of people still don't understand their ignorance when it
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
to trying to recognize that the the United States in general, or just even the world in general, has globalized to such an extent that economies would diminish and would not function if it were not for the immigrants groups in set locations. And it's funny that you bring up the fact that your daughter brought you back a menu from Sweden, a taqueria.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
actually I was actually in Denmark not too recently. Not too recently, actually, less than 48 hours. And actually, I didn't go into the restaurant, but there was a Mexican taco shop, a taqueria in there too, in the middle of Copenhagen, Denmark. And it reminded me of the time where we were also cruising around in Europe, in Ireland, and there was a Mexican restaurant ran by Peruvians. I don't know how that happened. But
Yeah, that happens.
that was interesting too. It's like, but then I started looking and recognizing the small details about it everywhere else. Is like there's kebabs, there's gyros, there's Chinese food, there's curry, there's just
Yeah.
every single bit of the out decentralized, I guess, the decentralized
Mhm.
cultures outside of Western Europe, or just conventions, that the general perceived conventions of what's considered to be the normal cultures, like it doesn't exist. It's just that assimilation of different people coming from different locations looking for jobs. And it's I don't know. It might be due to the fact that I'm still young in my years of experience, but I still don't understand where the disdain, where the hate is towards people literally trying to survive the same way that other people, the supposed original people, are still trying to survive in those regions. So
Yeah, it's you do know you can research this between the Irish people and the Mexican people. There is a lot of ties.
oh yeah,
The
yep,
Pan Patricio
some
Battalion, and you can
exactly,
find to this day, they have. But they have. I used to say they're the Mexicans of the Anglo world,
yeah,
and they're
yeah,
well known that way in the Anglo world. Uh, the Catholics,
mm-hmm.
the same thing. They've been oppressed by a bigger country, and they ended up in the British Army. They were some of the best soldiers in the British Army because that was their job. They'd send them to India or someplace.
Yeah,
But there's a lot of tension, and they've had literally wars in the streets in the early 80s, 70s, and 60s and 70s, and Northern Ireland, all that stuff. But
mm-hmm.
it's a very interesting connection.
Yeah,
Uh, they're just, but psychologically, a, a, a there's a bond. It's a
mm-hmm.
curious bond. Uh, Northern Mexico. There's a lot of, and I said, who in the hell are all these redheaded Mexican women? You're looking at
Oh
women
yeah,
and think,
yep,
wow, they're beautiful. Oh, they're Irish Mexicans. That they're well known in Mexico for having a different group. They're Chihuahua too, somewhat,
mm-hmm.
but there's Obregon is a General Obregon. They got statues of
Oh
the guy
yeah,
with one arm. The translation is O'Brien.
O'Brien, Obregon,
O'Brien was his
O'Brien.
original family name. Obregon. Yeah. So he was revolutionary and pissed off, and one of the leaders of the revolution that started in northern Mexico.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
yeah, that
and they still
now,
have that
yeah,
uh,
no, that
that
makes a
bond.
lot of sense.
But they're well aware of that in Sonora, the Irish uh, bond. They just have that bond.
Yeah, oh yeah,
My father was his family. They were from England.
mm-hmm.
And he was very prejudiced against the Irish. He was always like people would say, no, but negative towards Irish. He said, well, they have beautiful women, but man, they're stupid.
Mm.
I mean, he got that from his parents. He was born on a boat coming from England, you
Mm.
know. It was just ingrained in him, you know.
Yeah.
And he was a nice guy and everything, but he still would had that prejudice, you know.
Oh yeah.
I
And
said, oh, all
even
about the Irish writers and intellectuals, they were stupid. How you can go through that list,
yeah.
literature alone, you know. My God.
Yeah.
So
No, it's true. And even I can say for myself, like, I mean, I have my own personal prejudice on certain cultures and certain thought ways, but it's not out of malice. It's out of the exact same reason of what I was taught. But it's taking those years to be able to re-recognize and understand is like, wow, what a very stupid thing and very just incomprehensible way of trying to think about things. And it's taken a lot of hard it's taken some hardwiring to be able to fix that thought process, because it's the exact same. It's no different than when I was growing up and in certain situations with other teachers or other situations
yeah,
where I was in that sense. Is like it changes not. I'm very ambiguous now. I've had multiple interactions where people don't know where I'm from, so they generally assume I'm either somewhat of a mixture of white or don't want to ask because
uh-huh.
whatever the reason is. But
You're Filipino, maybe. Who knows?
something I've gotten every single semi brown race from
Yeah.
Mexican to Middle Eastern, Native American, possibly, I don't know, Cherokee or Paiute. It's been interesting. It's been an interesting conversation sometimes when I've had it. So that's opened my eyes a lot more towards the like I said, that prejudice and that initial thought of how we visually make that assumption and all of the in all the initial interactions without even recognizing or even knowing it. And
We have that, you know. I tell white people, don't tell me you don't get nervous when the couple of black guys walk down the street toward you.
Mhm.
And there's Mexicans, the same thing. They kind of have a prejudice against blacks. I've seen this too.
Oh yeah.
It
Yeah.
just is, you know.
And yeah.
Uh,
And it's those bad societal norms that are just
Movies,
inherently.
lots
Mhm.
of things. You
Exactly.
know, a black I remember from in Vietnam. There were blacks there. Who went to Vietnam? The
Yeah.
working class dumbasses like me, white Anglo working class. You know, the Hispanics, like Danny Blaze' brother, who was killed the first month he was there.
Mhm.
My Mexican buddy, and blacks. You know, and man, they were really, you talk about, you know. But I remember when I was at some place, some town that might have been Mito or maybe Saigon. We were against the wall. There was some shooting going on and stuff like that. All the time it was happening, you know, like a rock. Um, and I remember crouched against that wall and I was looking at him, you know, I was like scared shitless. Uh, and he says, well, you may not like my black ass, but my black ass is going to save your white ass. He had hand grenades. Was unarmed, I think. You know, he had his rifle and everything there. You know, it was just,
Yeah. Just certain
I
moments,
always
certain moments.
remember that black guy, you know. My
Yeah.
black ass is going to save your white ass.
Man.
You know, and you get a bond. There's a veteran bond there.
Yeah.
Veterans are
Very specific.
in the military, you know, that's the most desegregated.
Yeah.
It, yeah, it just, from the Second World War on, you know, it just,
Yeah.
you have to, when that guy's got to save your butt, and
Yeah.
you know, you know that may be the guy in the Navy or whatever. I'm sure they've looked at Eder Trinega, my Spanish teacher, in a different way, you know, when
Yeah.
that ship was going down.
Very true. Very true. It's a different thing once you're on the other side, and
Yeah.
especially in similar situations.
So I'm going to just go down this list. I said I did a lot of parent outreach. That was a big
Mhm.
deal. Materials. I became a good translator. All the stuff that they're confused about the grade system here, and you know, parent nights. Laura and I organized those. They got rid of all of this stuff
Mhm.
later. uh, uh, I learned Spanish. I made the point here that I strongly believe that Spanish proficiency, even basic, should be mandatory for ESL teachers and a lot of teachers. They give teachers a bonus, and any teacher who can speak Spanish in California. Years ago, I was told that, but it isn't. It's an indication of they could care less.
Yeah.
The marginalization was a word I often used. Yeah, yeah, you don't need to. I said, well, I think I can deal with the parents better and some of the students. I learned a lot of Spanish from fourth graders. How do you say this? How do you say that? Como se dice es? Um, and I also put that a teacher who learns a second language, Spanish particularly, that's the second language of the American West for almost the whole country now, is going to be a better ESL teacher. You have to understand what it is to learn another language and function in it. There's just no substitute. You don't know. It's like having a baby. If you never had a baby, you don't know what it's about. You learn a lot about English yourself. If you get intellectually involved in English, it's interesting language, as you know. That's your trade. You learn a lot about English as it's in itself, your own language. And I would tell parents, I would compliment parents who told, I don't know if you have kids or not, but they insisted that their kids maintain their Spanish. I used to go they had a newspaper, Ahora, get big piles of them, distribute them, take it home, etc. That there was very little to read in Spanish then to maintain it, and then I noticed those kids that were bilingual did much better in school. There's something about the brain. It's like having two tracks in your head, a left and right side, and it's like two computers, a backup hard drive or something.
Oh, yeah.
That second language, you're always kind of going between those two things. And that now it's, with brain science, that develops your neurons, your language, your linguistics, you as a journalist, it makes you a better journalist. You think about it.
Yeah. I have tried to do what the best I can with both languages, both interviewing in Spanish and English. And it's very true. It is very true that the way that the neuron and receptors connect when it comes to somebody who speaks multiple languages or can understand multiple languages even without speaking them has a higher capacity and comprehension and coherence when it comes to just general tasks. I mean, like I said, I'm not a big fan of math, but I do like numbers. It's one of those interesting things about it, and it's very true, and especially hearing from an educator primarily is the biggest thing, is like where I've never really heard it from other teachers, especially that literally do that or are only subjected to teaching what they think is going to be the requirement, and simply that, just the requirement.
I used to tell some teachers that, wow, this fourth grade girl who's speaking Spanish, she's speaking actually Latin. That's what we used to call Latin, Latino. She's speaking, I would put it to that way, a different way than Spanish is. I don't know how to put it. It's got an attitude from the Anglo world. She's speaking Latin. My God. Yeah. If you look at a Latin dictionary, even on that, a lot of stuff is just the same, similar, very similar. Those little kids are speaking Latin. I would tell them, wow, can you speak Latin or Greek? So if you have kids, I would encourage that, because on so many levels. Why are Indians so good? East Indians so good at computation and IT stuff. What's the word I'm trying to look for? They're excellent coders and whatever.
Proficient and shoot, I know which other word you're talking about, but yeah, very very proficient in
programming, programming, and just their world, you know, that's who's your text that works every place now. And in this country, every place. And it has been pointed out many years ago. It's a language. There's something about their language, and it's incomprehensible to us, but there's something that develops that mental capacity that makes them just fantastic in computer code. And that may be with the Chinese too.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a lot of the complexities with the way that their grammar and context actually changes and the syntax.
yeah,
I think that is I don't think I've actually read an article specifically on that, on why most Eastern Asian countries and people who speak or from Asian descent is really what do you call it, a reason why. But yeah, there's studying into Japanese, Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Korean. All those languages they have a lot of the same similarities when it comes to the fast changing and quick switching of context and perception with them. So it's yeah. So there might be a lot of it into that. I mean, things.
I've heard theorizing about Chinese because they say because Chinese is so damn difficult to learn for
Oh
the
yeah,
Chinese that they get a mental discipline, a fierce, you know, if you can write in Chinese.
yeah, levels. Yeah, like in the exact same way that you were saying earlier, just the connection between neurons,
Yeah,
receptors, and just everything, just making a lot more sense, or making better sense than we can actually understand in a normalized way.
yeah. There's something at a deep level of the mind that a second language, develops.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're going to get Alzheimer's
No, yeah,
so
there's
quick
yeah, that I think it was even
for
an
that
article
reason.
between the Mayo Clinic that they actually started doing a lot of those studies. They actually did started publishing a lot of the medical journals started publishing that the likelihood of somebody with learning a second language or being somewhat proficient in understanding a separate language has a less likelihood or zero, close to zero likelihood of not even developing anywhere near Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yeah, they're working this out on a cellular level now. They're, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they can now, as you know, when you look at some of that,
Oh yeah.
uh, technology, educational technology, which we're using right now. When I started in the late 80s, the mimeograph machines in the high school and Fallon, I subbed there for several years. And here, that was how you made materials.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You'll have to look at a video on Periscope or something to see what they were, you know, at World War II.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, you know, there was copy machines. There was really no such thing. In the office, you could go in there if the principal's not around and sweet talk the secretary to make a copy when they had a copy machine, you know. I started computers very, very early, actually on a Navy base in the early 80s. I was working for a contractor I put in there. And that was when the first PCs came out.
Mm-hmm.
They had the buddy, and I remember these guys excitingly. Uh, they were all mostly Air Force officers there, and the strike force. And I was hired as the art director. That's how desperate they were. Uh, I went to Hanford and got training. I went to San Diego and got training in the studios producing materials for the officers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I had a top secret clearance. That's how desperate I could get a top secret clearance. We had outside of the office Marines with burn bags. You've probably seen that.
Yeah.
You could leave any paper you had. It had to be put in a bag and given to some Marine holding a bag. A Marine holding a bag then, and he would go out to the burn barrel and with a rifle and burn it. It sounds silly now, but it was the beginning of that computer PC age. Uh, you know, not the mainframes I always had, but you know, I got some experience there. I left that job for a lot of reasons. my PTSD, insomnia problem really kicked in strong. I couldn't sleep under the stress, something. Um, and I worked for years in several years with a good friend in Fallon in graphics and printing. They had early computers, typography, composite stuff. It printed out little strips that we would put on with wax to compose a page. You know? But it was a computer machine with great big drums of letters, fonts on it.
Yeah.
Expensive then. It was $35,000. That was like, I don't know, 100,000 now for a little printing plant. And so I got exposure to the technology at an early stage. Then coming into the schools, they were computer free. They were just almost nothing. I started buying. I got on the Well. That was an early email site. It was called a Well. I forget what the letters spelled out. You can look it up. It was $25 a month. It was a lot then, and it was just a green screen with text on it. But it's so damned exciting. You could join groups. It was that early. I forget command line. To get between pages and things, you had to have a sheet of command lines. It's got a name, but I forgot what it is. But that was so damned exciting, with a modem hookup. You'd end up spending $20 on a session at night. But I went out of my way the first year I was teaching to do that, to learn what the hell this is about, and communicate with other people. User groups, I think they called them. I went to a convention of a bunch of Australians, teachers in Reno in a casino. And they were saying, hey, we can plug this computer into the wall here to a phone jack. And I'm talking to Alice Springs, my friends. They were kind of pioneers. I don't know why, like a lot of things. Something about their isolation or something. They felt more need to connect. But they were early pioneers in educational computing. And so I went to conference after conference after conference, and anything I could find, I started, the schools would spend zero. Well, here you go again. Not for those students. So I got my MasterCard out and started buying computers and printers and, dot matrix printers. And of course, there was no internet quite then. And I got excited about this tool, and I wanted to give it to these kids. And I did for years. That little room I had there for a while in that old office, I had a whole bunch of Macs sitting around, and I can't remember. Sometime later, we got Ethernet in there. And the shop teacher, there was a guy named Alan Paddle. He was he was a character. I don't know if you remember him. He was my computer angel. He was the shop teacher, wood shop and everything there for years and years and years. He was always there in the summer. He had a van parked there when you went by. Kind of a bald-headed guy. He was a Mormon, kind of a chubby Mormon guy.
I think I remember
hyperactive. He drove a school bus. This guy had enough. He was teaching all day, hooking up everybody's computers and driving a school bus. He died of a heart attack in 2006, climbing Wheeler Peak outside of Ely. He went walking up there at 12,000 feet. And the reason I bring that up is I flew my airplane around Wheeler Peak, and I didn't go that high because there's not enough oxygen. I went below the peak.
Wow.
And he walked up there. He was a middle-aged guy, and he was like 53 years old, dropped dead. Wonderful guy. He's buried out here, neglected. I took a circuit board, kind of a Mexican style thing.
Yeah.
Wet at this, honoring the death. And there's some flowers there, but I took a circuit board and put it on a metal pole, painted it up and took it out and put it on the screen. I wonder what people think. There's an old circuit board out of a Mac or something, as his memorial. By the way, he was wonderful, wonderful with the Mexican kids too. And everybody, it's just one of those, you know, died too young. But he got me enthusiastic too. He came over one day, said, "There's something called the World Wide Web, Ted." Oh, okay, what's that? So that back at that stage, and there was no. It was something you got at home on a modem phone. uh, I started taking classes. I like I told you to. I got all kinds of programs here. Rosetta Stone, Ellis. I got a list on this thing I made. Language stuff. I said, hey, this is powerful. I tried many programs. Hey, the kids like this. At least they're not being. I said the worst kid in the class is staying engaged, and I like this. I told teachers, hey, you got a problem, kid? Put them on a computer.
Mm-hmm.
um, but they were learning stuff, and as ESL kids, they're isolated. A lot of things. They had a place where they could kind of get away from the school world and a refuge, and screw around with the computers and do stuff. They learned a lot about computers, basically, And I'm sure a lot of them are using a keyboard someplace now, that like my typing teacher, who taught me how to type and got me out of off the boats. Um, that took a course 8 years. I got a master's at George Washington University, a pioneer course, and I had to put a satellite dish out in the yard in Fallon and hook it up, spend that money, and I it was one of those things you watch videos very early. The internet happened in the midst of this program about 4 years in. Now we got something called the World Wide Web and email, uh, tapes, and a lot of the material came in distance learning on a satellite dish. It sounds crazy now, and I would record it on VCR tape, and replay it, and uh, that's a good way to learn things, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, a lot of times in Spanish classes or anything I was doing, I had to drive back and forth 30 miles every day, play a damn tape. That's what I did. You can do better now on a USB key, but I would tell people, you can learn a lot while you're wasting time on the road.
Yeah.
Uh, that was a good class. It was a lot of it was educational technology, and a lot of the history of it and everything. I still have some of the textbooks here, and I've just got wound up whole hog in that. I ended up teaching classes for other teachers who were new to computers, at the time. And it was I do make the point here that the 90s was just a fertile, exciting period in education in general. And the 2000 was just the opposite in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask something very specific about that because I have actually brought it up with a couple of the previous interviews, but as well as even in passing, just in passing, is that I am a child product of the No Child Left Behind initiative. So
Yeah.
if I can ask, when President Bush, at the time when he was in office, and he instituted the No Child Left Behind initiative, and you had already been a teacher closing in on 20 years, 15, 20 years at this time, when his initiative came out, what were some of the negative impacts that you noticed from what do you call it, that were instituted besides the standardization, the standardized testing, which we suffered through that multiple years, and I can still say it's one of
Yeah,
those.
you were in a standardized test every month.
Yeah, every quarter there was always the quarter, the shoot, jogging my mind now. The quarter, the semester, and then the annual one.
Yeah, that was the good old days when you were there. It got twice.
Mm-hmm.
It just, there was a meme going around at the time for the No Child Left Behind. It was No Child's Behind Left. I don't know if you
Yeah.
ever heard that. No Child's Behind Left,
Left.
among a lot of people who are academics who are, what the hell's going on? They're saying 100 years of educational research and teacher practice and craft, and everything was overturned. They had something called, you know, achievement levels.
Mhm.
Okay, you don't you don't deal with, to use an example, algebra. If you don't know your multiplication tables, maybe algebra, you're not ready for algebra. Duh. I mean, my mother knew this in 1937. And teachers were unable to say, "Hey, this kid," even some ESL kids, uh, go over in the corner there, let's say multiplication tables, and have her work on this. She has to know this. You have to know this. And, that's individual education. That's what that kid needs then.
Mhm.
Common sense, maybe. Uh, that was thrown out the window. It was awful. And then that was followed up by the Bill Gates Common Core Curriculum.
Yeah.
Uh, and that was just like a lot of things. Medicine, and Gates is now a devil. He was then. Their money, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Hmm.
You can cut this part.
Oh,
Financed a lot of this stuff.
that's a very specific topic that we can put our tinfoil hats on for a different conversation on that day. But I definitely catch that drift.
I mean, in the 90s, they had him in. They were grilling him in Congress about the Microsoft.
Yeah, Microsoft monopolization,
Stealing everything from everybody else.
Copyright infringement, and anti-competitive practices
this is
as well.
Nothing new.
No, it's just a rehash of some of the last season. That's all it is.
And in the computer world, I don't know about this.
Yep.
Gates. But anyway, I said in the early 2000s, the education world turned to the worst due to what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They had high standards, higher level thinking skills. Oh no, the multiplication table that's no, knowing how to divide and multiply and add, or no, that's not higher level thinking skills. My God, you can't. There was, I forget, there was a term. It used to be a kind of it was individualized education. They would test kids. There's nothing wrong with tests. Find out where you are, what you need, like a doctor or something. You got to do this and that and to advance to the next level. That was thrown out. Common sense, for a lot of this nonsense. I put down here, the school culture. Excessive testing and control over schools. The school culture eventually turned more toxic and oppressive. Literally, all of a sudden it got to be East Germany, instead of collegial. Hey Ted, you screwed up or something, but you're some principle. Don't do this or that. But you're doing a good job, and you get a good, whatever. That just ended. You had administrators coming in there with iPads and stuff and marking stuff down, and they always had observations. Yeah, it's good. The kids would settle down when the principal comes in to write down on. But that changed to just oppressive. All students were forced into the same curriculum.
Yeah.
Special ed, and it wasn't just ESL. ESL is a branch of special ed in a way. It is special ed, but not in a derogatory sense. I worked for 2 years with a GT, gifted and talented. We were in the same room. And she said that's special education too. There's, it's not just kids who are whatever, but ESL is a special education. Kids with special needs, like advanced GT kids.
No, it's funny how you mentioned that it's kind of funny and ironic, the fact that we like to use the word special for everything else in every single type of sense and connotation, and like when it comes to a very unique and individualized type of thing, individual, right? But as soon as we start including the certain aspects of the lexicon and then putting it into it, its own supposed generalized context, just by adding the word needs makes it a derogatory term. And that's one of the things where one of the previous interviews as well, another teacher I've interviewed was the same, it explained to me the same thing. It's not a necessity out of, it's not the fact that it's it's not the fact that the person requires, or the student requires the specialized training or the specialized needs. It's just the way that it's actually being framed because of the word in itself being special needs. And it's like, but like you explained to it, it's like the use of special needs doesn't necessarily mean being on the spectrum, being in a what do you call it, in a developmentally latent state, or anything like that. It literally needs, it requires it requires a particularized type of attention. And man, I don't want to go on this tangent, but just to kind of close it off, where it comes to one thing I've learned about educators and teachers in the past is that now that I know and I can understand and have done a fair bit of research when it comes to like the way the languages is, that we like to entrap those words without recognizing the full extent of the definition of the words. And that's what's has caused a lot of problems in the way that resources are being allocated towards education. The focus on the subjects and the curriculums that are being taught and being displayed to the students and even to the educators, to teachers, because we're not, as a society or just in general, as whatever it is that we're trying to call ourselves now, when it comes to the education side, to the necessity of being taught and teaching, we're stringent ourselves, or you yourself have been stringent to that singular definition, not the full spectrum of the defined word itself. And it makes it difficult. Like I said, it makes it difficult, and it's very particularized.
Now we're all on a spectrum of something.
Exactly. And it's not that we're not, it's where do we recognize where that spectrum is, but what is the spectrum? That's one of the biggest questions I've always had with that. It's like, no, not to discount. We understand that at this point in time, in the more recent years, the what do you call it? The way that the teaching, the retention, the whole education, like, it's at a standstill. It's at a stagnant point that it's become regressionary. Like I said previously, it's becoming regressionary, and I think it's kind of I don't want to say a cop out. It's more of a way to be able to simplify, but it oversimplifies the fact that using it, we have to use the simply contextualized form of, we are on a spectrum. There is somebody on the spectrum, or they lie somewhere in the spectrum, to be able to try to justify and de-justify the necessity for people to for somebody to be able to receive the resources or the help that they need. It makes it really difficult.
Yeah, it's the bottom line of that era is they stopped doing individualized education for everybody. They in special ed, it's a joke, a lot of it, that pushed out all of the kids. They pushed them. They're pushing them all out. There's kids that need special ed. They pushed out the ESL kids. Oh, we're going to exit them. That was the whole thing. Let's exit them. And there's a lot of damage done there to the ESL kids. It's full inclusion. Yeah, we have full inclusion now. Push out programs. I wrote down here where they were thrown out of the ESL. The idea of an ESL room, I put down here, I'm just going to go over this paragraph. There was an idea of an ESL room. It was a friendly place where ESL students would go for help and companionship with other ESL students, their group, that was abolished. teaching is not just subject matter. It is also called counseling and guidance. You can go to education classes and take counseling and guidance classes. You have to. Everybody's a counselor, not just the counselor, which they don't do counseling anymore. Uh, but that used to be the teacher is a counselor too. um, students and parents need teachers they know are available for advice, compassion, and advocacy. I said in my case, it was often a refuge from a hostile world.
Mhm.
I talk about, I had a Hispanic woman as an aide, and sometimes I just told her some kid comes in with some kind of trouble. The teacher sent, often the teacher, can you do something with Maria? And I would tell her, just, will you take this girl out and just walk around out there on the track for a while with her? And that's a nice afternoon or something, and just talk to her about this thing. That's it.
Mhm.
That's what they needed. Uh, Maybe they weren't getting that at home or something. In fact, a lot of kids I knew, I said, I would have them come in early. They were pesky. Earlier, I showed up early and I had a trailer there for a while. We used to laugh. We're all in the trailer park now. And welcome to the trailer park. That was our standing joke.
Yep.
The ESL room after several years there. But they would come in earlier, and I didn't quite like it, just well. But they that was the best part of their day, being in school. That was because things sucked so much at you know at home.
Mhm.
you know it just I could go on and on about the stories. We used to do home visits and everything, and you know and I lived in a trailer park here for a while. I before I got married and got a house. I had a house in Fallon, got divorced, and I lived in an RV park down there. So for 5 years, I I was doing night classes, and I went back and forth and went home on weekends. Uh, but a lot of kids were there in the trailer parks, and I'd watch them load the bus. And uh, but I noticed that was early in my career. The Mexican girls, particularly, they were dressed so nicely. Um, and I said, yeah, you know, I noticed the same thing in Mexico in poorer areas. They would just dress nicely, and they got nice clothes, and were just compared to the mainstream kids, even, and proud. Uh, I noticed this. They sent me to Silver Springs for a while, and it was the same thing. Some teachers noticed that. Silver Springs. I guess you've
Mhm.
been there. Uh, uh, I remember a Anglo girl coming up at me, and I was out there in the playground, and God, it looked like those old movies of Appalachia or Hillbilly. She had a dirty white shirt on, a T-shirt. Poor thing, God. And she just grabbed my arm, and looking up at me like not even saying anything, like help me or something. And I would see them Mexican girls in fourth, fifth, third, fourth grade. They were dressed so nice. Their parents were insisted, that they. And I think the girls had that a certain ethic, and the teachers noticed that too. Uh, in contrast to a lot of the mainstream kids, in poverty. Uh, anyway, it's just a observation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, I put down here that the term ESL. That's the title of your thing. English is a second language. Duh. I mean, that was, I don't know where it got started, but 100 years ago, who knows? Uh, but that's kind of hostile. People would talk to me. What do you do? ESL, relatives
Mhm.
in Reno. It's English as a second language. Second language? They was, what the hell is that? They were all of us hostile. And I said, well, it's English as a second language. Yeah, the people, duh, you know. But the system, you started using this term ELL, English language learners. Well, I'm an English language learner. Everybody's an English language learner. You know, uh, the term was changed. I kept using ESL just to be a pain,
Mm-hmm.
but the officially, federally, nationwide, that was another thing of that era. It was hostile. I said wrote here it implied there was something wrong with having a second language. That's the way it struck me. That language supremacy would rule.
Yeah. It's it's funny. I actually didn't know that it had actually changed
They
to
changed it to
ELL.
ELL. Yeah.
Yeah. Reading
Uh,
that surprised me a little bit, especially since like I said, I growing up always ESL. Any single time I ever introduced myself or even talked to anybody that was like foreign or found out that I spoke Spanish or anything, it was like, yeah, ESL. I was an ESL kid. And it's always stuck with me in a lot of ways. And like I said, that's the main reason why I named it, because of that. It's like it's the exact same way. It was such a unique and pivotal point in my life to be able to communicate, not only just with like my teachers, but also with my fellow classmates, using English, not my primary language, but English, an avenue, a vehicle to be able to speak. And it does bring some level of melancholy when it comes to you mentioning that they changed the TL because of its perceived hostilities. Like, hostility is a lot of things, but changing a simple word because it's what do you call it? I guess at this point I'm just gonna be very stereotypical and just say it's a very triggering. If it's that much of a triggering thing, then that's on you, because
That's the way it strikes me. I knew a guy who was an a Navy doctor again.
damn Navy, they're always doing
Yeah,
something.
and he was a practitioner in his 70s, a good friend of mine. I remodeled his house one year before teaching, and we got to know each other real good, etc. But his story, he said he was in the battle, all those famous battles in the Pacific. And he was a patching up Marines they would bring on, but he was on a what are those wooden ships? The mine layers, mine
Mhm.
detectors. They had wooden hulls.
Yeah.
That I don't know what they do now, but but it was a little ship. And he said that Zeros would fly over. He could see that. Look at the faces of the Japanese pilots flying 100 feet above him, but they didn't never shot at his boat or his ship. They didn't want to waste a bullet on it. They just flew past him. He would drink coffee. He
Mhm.
said he watched the Second World War go by, and then he hit the carriers and the main group. But he was at Iwo Jima, all those places here, legendary things. But he was kind of an old-fashioned doctor, and when medicine changed, they changed it to healthcare provider.
Mhm.
You know, he had a small clinic there, and he worked on senior citizens mostly, and the prostitutes that came in from they had a brothel in Fallon years ago.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
And my friend's printing plant was next door. We used to have coffee there. But he said he's going to get a T-shirt. I am not a healthcare provider. That's corporate bullshit.
Mhm.
Says I'm a doctor. I sew up Marines and take care of senior citizens. Now he was one himself. That phenomenon that I'm talking about wasn't just education. It's just medical. Talk to doctors. Everybody. I'm not going woe is me though. The teaching, it's happened in so many things.
Oh yeah.
So many things now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot of downplaying of the level of professionalism, because it's the exact same, like you're mentioning, the exact same, and the exact same at a certain point, the professional career tracks like that of being a teacher were originally called educators. That's why I use the
Yeah.
word educators, and then it
Yeah.
changed to teachers, and then it changes to whatever it is now.
I don't.
Yeah, see, doctors is the same thing. It was the same thing. Medical specialist, well, healthcare providers, now medical specialists.
Yeah.
You're not a doctor anymore. Lawyers. Obviously, that's a different that's a different
Yeah.
level, but they're still professionals, lawyers to counsel to legal representatives. It's a never evolving. It's a necessity for ever evolving things without actually being necessary, and it causes a lot of problems. It does cause a lot of problems in those things in a lot of aspects, and it's yeah, it's I don't know how else to put it in other than that. And it's a lot more, it's a lot more prominent once you really start talking into, once you start talking and you start realizing that it's not just, and it hasn't like just been in education like you mentioned. It's been everywhere. It's been everywhere, and it's more prominent and business speak. That's what it is. It's business speak,
Corporate speak.
corporate
Yeah.
speak, business speak,
You know,
all
a lot
of
of
that.
that. And,
Mhm.
those are just full of beans now, and then
Yeah.
they're mocks, but it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Being a professional is, there's something called professional ethics.
Mhm.
Generally that means that you're working in the interest of the client, the student, whatever,
Mhm.
first, and monetary things are secondary, other things are secondary.
Exactly.
And it's like a priest or something, maybe. It sounds funny nowadays, but uh, you know, that was all thrown out this era. Basically, they drove out so many teachers who had passion for learning, you know, professional ethics. There actually is a list of things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Da 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 da. For God's sake, realtors have a professional ethics list, you know. And teaching as a profession is always, it's a lower middle class
Mhm.
job, you know. My son makes twice as much as a teacher as a computer geek at a university, Just,
Mhm.
um, it's not at the level of doctors and lawyers and all of that higher, but it is a profession.
Yeah.
But there is something called a professional attitude. In the Navy, you do things because that's what you do. Whatever you're doing in the Navy, I think you're a profession. Uh, a private pilot, I've been told, no, you're a professional. You have to have a professional attitude when you get into a Cessna.
Mhm.
You know, just as much as a airline pilot.
Oh yeah.
You're amateur hour is not when you're taking off on an airplane. It's not amateur hour anymore.
Oh no, nowhere near close to that.
So I mean, the term professional is in the Navy. In the enlisted ranks, it can be applied on too. There's ethics, and everybody's trapped in some system where they have to. The last few years I worked, I was what am I going to do? Everybody's trapped into. I got a mortgage, I got a house, I got a wife, I got this and that. I got to make the payments, and
Mhm.
they ran out a lot of good teachers, and it was just kind of a. I just noticed it around me. Uh, I part of the, it. I said this period was not just ESL, but the corruption of American education was done to all the other disciplines:
Yeah.
science, math, English, social studies, history teachers. Some of the best science. I remember one at the high school. I used to go in and sit in with the new ESL kids in classes, so I was in the back of the room,
Mhm.
invisible with them, and the teachers didn't even know I was there. But one of the best was an old-fashioned science teacher, biology teacher.
Mhm.
He was just something out of my era, on a stool up there, and they didn't. Oh, you're not supposed to lecture. They were saying he would just fill the board up with stuff and a chalkboard like you see in a movie in the 40s with the topic on mitochondria or mitochondria or whatever the topic was. And he would have him write all that stuff down first, and then he'd go over it. And but he maintained a class. The kids liked him. They respect. He was so different.
Mhm.
This guy was just different. uh, he wasn't their friend or anything, but he wasn't trying to be their friend necessarily. Uh, and they learned a lot of science and math. They wanted to get rid of this guy so bad. I talked to him. No way. That he didn't fit. the guy who ran they had a program for the jail, the brig
Hmm.
in the school was called APEP, alternative placement.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, you got 2 weeks in the APEP. It was run by a guy from Fallon. I knew the family. He was an engineer for Con Ed in California, electrical engineer.
Hmm.
He wore a tie and a white shirt coming in all the time. Uh, and then he ran a good class. And the kids would say, "Oh, we learn more math and science in APEP than we've learned in the regular class." Um, and he was just an old timer. He would set up lessons for them instead of that abstract. There was too much abstract stuff.
Yeah.
Math, algebra. Uh, oh God, which is crazy. He would say, "You're a truck driver. You got to drive to Salt Lake." He would put it in terms like that.
Hmm.
And you got to find time, distance, and speed. He would have exercises. You can't run out of gas and wells, etc. And he would set up a scenario where they had to work on that. Practical life.
Hmm.
Time, distance, and speed is basic. They threw out what they used to call home economics.
Yeah.
The kids now, the young people, they're getting robbed buying new cars because they don't understand anything about finance,
Hmm.
nothing, and banking. They had these old teachers that were teaching, they had checks. Here's how you write a check. Here's how you keep a checkbook. Here's a budget, all of that stuff. No, that's not higher level. So it was thrown out, for higher level skills. It's just insane. Everybody's going to be college prep.
Hmm.
It got insane. So that's kind of the topics that uh,
Yeah.
I worked till I was 67 years old, which is older than normal. And there was some buyout program, and I could have worked for years actually, uh, more, but I liked the kids. The problems were not kids and parents.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was always the at the very end of the day, just like anything, it was just the resistance into the system, resistance and resisting the new changing system, which always sounds like a bad thing, as especially as an older man, especially as an older man and an older education professional, that
Yeah,
they would more than likely paint you that way, as is like he's just too out of his years. He's fighting the new changes, either the changes for good, but
yeah,
when you look at it in the and not even in hindsight, when you look at it in the in the speculative eye, and realize that the experience has paid off from your entire time frame of being a teacher, being so involved in not just the students' lives, but just in everything in general, is that you saw this coming from the very start. And it was kind of like uh it's not The Boy Who Cried Wolf. It was the there's that different story about the warning about what you're not seeing right now is it's not because you don't see it, it's because you don't know that you're not seeing it yet. But when it happens, it does. And I think that was the biggest, that's still now the biggest problem with the way that every single aspect and facet of life has changing so much. And but the focusing more on education, when you started ringing those alarms, the canary in the coal mine,
yeah,
that's what I meant to say. In that same similar way, as like there was no canary in the coal mine moment. There just wasn't. It was just kind of like, hey, it's a crazy person. It's the shadows in the wall allegory. The exact same way they came in, they try to beat you down for that whole saying, but it's what we don't see and what we don't understand in the moment of what it is. That's kind of how I'm seeing a lot of these changes that affected your career at the very end.
yeah. It was they just you after a while you're part of the push out. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Later, I love history and stuff that this is a common theme.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy, Hugh somebody, in the Second World War. He was the head of the Royal Air Force, the RAF. He won the Battle of Britain. The guy was eccentric. He thought differently,
Yeah.
Uh, he saved lives. He did it in that situation. He was Air Force general. He's famous. You can look it up. But a little kooky and eccentric and etc. like that. He would sit around. They say go home and sit around the fire. He would see his dead pilot's ghost. He would report that. Oh man, that's weird. That weirdo. You know, he won the battle a bit. His the way he set it up and said we got to do this and this and change this. They were getting their asses kicked. You know, they got rid of him. They got rid of him. He was sent to Siberia, someplace. He was got late years later. He got some recognition.
Mm-hmm.
There was a naval officer. I read the book. The guy was the top code breaker in the Second World War. God, he was famous, eccentric. In,
the Enigma code breakers for World War II.
He broke the Japanese code. He was brilliant. He was in Hawaii, down in a bunker where they had all the secret stuff, purple code or something. And I've got the book someplace. But he would show up to work in a robe, like he just got out of bed, and he was in the code breaker, the naval officer. Mm-hmm. There, eccentric, totally. He won the Battle of Midway, I believe, because of the knowledge, etc. Okay, this is when they're coming, kind of a thing. He was known for that. They gave him a job on a dry dock. That's where he ended up, in California, someplace. They got rid of him. And I started reading these stories. I was feeling kind of depressed about my career for a while. And that's a common pattern. Mm-hmm. It's just, but I think there's going to be some change and pushback on things. It'll only go so far, the pendulum, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they were the best years of my life. The most fulfilling is working in ESL. I mean, like any other thing I did was, I don't know. And so I just recommend to anybody to push ahead on whatever aspirations. It sounds corny. Push ahead on any aspirations you have, or you got to get out of your comfort zone and go for it and jump that cliff sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's very true. Well, I don't know, Ted. We've been at it for about 3 hours now. I don't want to.
Surprised our voices are still intact.
Oh yeah. Well, no, like I mentioned, I mean, I think this is a pretty good spot to finish the episode, and I don't know. I think I might make it switch the segment, but if you'd be willing to come back for another episode on or something else, we could definitely do that and set up a later date for that. But before we close it off, I mean, do you have any questions, anything else that you'd like to say before we close it here?
Well, education good. What was that some old? That's good. What was that some old? I don't remember. You maybe have seen enough old movies or something.
It sounds familiar. It rings very familiar, but I'm trying to think about it now.
It's I always at any levels. My father was a high school dropout. He was a book reader. In fact, he told me he learned to read in the Depression in the libraries. You get off a train and go in and read books. He got his education, and he ended up talking. My mother was a teacher, and with other teachers, he knew more about literature than they did. It turned out he could tell them about Faulkner and whatever the authors of the day were. So there's a working class intellectuals, and I know that there's a lot of Hispanics who are in less circumstances. I don't know. Reading is just whether you're that black guy in prison or I was back east in your area. When I got back from Vietnam, I was put on a aircraft carrier. It was in dry dock. What a world change, but I was given I was parking lot guard in a little box there all day. That was my duty. That was my naval career on a. That was a big aircraft carrier. What the hell was that? Slips me now. It never. I never saw it go to sea. I never got to go to sea. But I read books all day. I had nothing to do, and it was between shifts or something on that. And I just read books. I did that in Vietnam. In the middle of everything. Just get your mind out of this world and do something. Learn something. If you look at my shelves here, they're piled up with books. So I recommend that to anybody. And that's old-fashioned advice. That's the best handheld device there is paper. I've got all the other stuff, but and I believe in that. And you have a wonderful. Everybody has also, the internet. I've been selling that for years. Whatever circumstance you're at, nowadays you got language. Look at that. If you really want to learn any language or Spanish or English or anything, my God, subtítulos.
That was a game changer for me.
Yeah. You can watch something you like. I tell parents or kids or anybody, telenovelas, whatever it is. I don't care. And you can learn a lot of incidental English. Just like being in an environment. When I'm in Mexico, I'm in a place that there's no English any place.
Yeah.
Where I'm at. It's not like some tourist place. It's an industrial town. And so there I am, By God, you learn a lot of Spanish.
It's very true. Very true. And well, I think that's the best way, and I couldn't think you could put it any way better to be able to close it off the episode with that. But before I do end this and we close it off, like, first off, primarily, I want to thank you, Ted. I want to thank you, Mr. March, for one, coming here and being a guest, for me, a very sought out guest for many, many years, even before I started the podcast. Two, that you were one of the inspirations that gave me the opportunity to be able to succeed in a lot of ways in my English career in Mexico, coming from Mexico in the United States, in the small town of Fernley, Nevada. And like I said, an inspiration. You may not realize this. I know we talked a little bit earlier, but you may not have realized this, but you as a teacher, as an educator, inspired me to go into the military, not out of patriotic reasons, not out of selfish reasons, but to be able to serve. And if I can just say one quick story, I still remember, like I said, that picture of you on the Riverine boat in Vietnam in your office when I used to go visit, when we used to have our counseling sessions. And I always asked about that. And I always wondered, who is this man? Who is this individual that's here teaching some illegal kid from Zacatecas, the San Luis Potosí in Fernley, Nevada, that could be so well spoken in Spanish and have no malice in the way that he's trying to teach and communicate with people. And like I said, it took me many years to realize that it's like these are the type of mentors and educators that give the inspiration. Like I said, that give the inspiration that you've given me, that to be able to pursue these goals and these careers. And like I said, one of the main namesakes for the podcast, the ESL sessions, because of your involvement, just like Ms. Barbosa, Ms. Urrutia, and that. So that I want to thank you. And then lastly, I don't know if you've ever heard it before. I don't know if it would make a difference, but I want to welcome you back home. I want to welcome you back home to the country that you fought for, not in any negative way, but because you deserve it. You as my fellow brother in arms, as a fellow service member, deserve that much as well. Just like anybody that didn't come back home, and as well as anybody who's still being sent off, I want to welcome you back home and close it off with that for you to being part of here, and definitely looking forward to any future episodes that you might want to be be a part of, which that's for a later date.
Well, thank you, and you and people like you were the best part of my life. You gave me a lot. I've realized over the years, you taught me a lot.
Yeah, and like I said, like just like we learned from you, is the exact same way that I guess that I see that now. Like I said, talking to all my old teachers and other people that we taught you just a little bit as well, a little bit as well. Well, I think that's a pretty good note to close it off on. What do you think?
Okay, that's good enough. It's been long. I'm looking at the clock, and we can always make another session on some topic. Fine,
definitely. Yeah. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll close off this super extended episode of the ESL sessions of En Mi Comunidad, the segment, and we'll go ahead and call it a night. So we'll go ahead. Have a good one.
Buenas noches.